Welcome, fellow organisms, to my environmental biology final portfolio, a curated, poorly narrated video anthology of experiments, projects, and spontaneous fieldwork conducted in both academic and domestic ecosystems. If you're just tuning in, the structure follows 9 categorical modules of learning outcomes, each demonstrated herein through 2 examples. My elaborately concocted experiments are designed not only to illustrate mastery of the course material, but my continued enthusiasm to explore biology. This introduction functions as both prologue and first module, general biology connections, lifelong learning, and everyday science. Because in nature, nothing's wasted, not even introductions. Biology pervades my life like an opportunistic microbe. It's not limited to my regular nature walks, though situational awareness of poison oak and rattlesnakes remain a survival trait I still carry from California. My geological literacy ensures I can classify the rock I stub my toe on, granite, by the way, and accurately identify the soil type I'm doomed to garden in. Speaking of gardens, they're my perpetual field sites, open-air laboratories where I conduct low-level genetic selection, pest deterrence, and peace treaties with insects. I've cloned plants, propagated cuttings, and dabbled in biocontrol diplomacy. Lavender and marigolds act as my biological warfare units. I leave the resident spiders alone. They're free pest control contractors with impeccable work ethic. Pollinators receive preferred customer VIP status, and I manage a biodiverse clientele of bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and the occasional uninvited wasp. Animals also occupy a significant niche in my personal biosphere. My household operates somewhere between a sanctuary and an unlicensed rehabilitation clinic, where I've spent over 20 years triaging injured wildlife and negotiating with irritable birds. My study in veterinary medicine instilled appreciation for anatomy, behavior, and the biochemical logic behind a well-timed snack. Observing animal cognition and social dynamics has given me insights I sometimes wish applied to humans. Biology, however, is more than epidermis deep. I use it daily to understand my own physiology, from plant and animal tissue structure, which, yes, improves my cooking technique, to nutrient metabolism, which explains my post-coffee existential crises. Whenever I eat something regrettable, my pancreas files a formal complaint. Hydration is a real-time osmosis meets psychiatric experiment where I can picture my brain cells shrinking from thirst. Sleep deprivation becomes an uncontrolled study in neural function and hallucination thresholds. I consider all of this autoethnography, which sounds much fancier than forgetting to go to bed. My builder's instincts benefit from a biological framework as well. Knowledge of lignin and cellulose helps me pick the right wood. Understanding adhesives as complex polymers justifies my overuse of glue. My ecological awareness even helps me predict hyperlocal weather patterns through organism cues and cloud morphology, far more reliable than the app that insists it's sunny while I'm getting rained on. Kinesiology and anatomy inform my martial arts practice, converting every motion into a biomechanical experiment on torque and leverage. Playing music, too, is a kind of biology. Fine motor control, auditory feedback, and neural synchronization, all wrapped in rhythm. Even my consumer choices, fabrics, medications, and yes, botanical mood enhancers, benefit from knowing the molecular and biological mechanisms at play. Despite my occasional cynicism toward the human experiment known as civilization, I maintain a childlike fascination with the natural world. Every organism, from a dandelion to a tardigrade, is a reminder that existence itself is an elaborate Rube Goldberg machine running on sunlight and stubbornness. Since I veered away from a degree in animal medicine, this will likely be my last formal science course, but biology, inconveniently, is not a subject one can quit. It follows me everywhere, in my food, my pets, my sleep patterns, and the moss currently trying to annex my roof shingles. Our professors ask what we plan to do with this portfolio. This is less an ending than a continuation. A long-term study of one human organism attempting to live symbiotically with the rest of the biosphere. Sure, it'll exist in perpetuity on a dusty hard drive in the back of my closet, but if I get one thing from this portfolio, I hope to encourage your curiosity in the natural world and inspire you to explore and experiment on your own. And if someone were to call you a paramecium brain, you'd know what they mean. So without further ado, Do try this at home. Ah yes, safety first. The sacred mantra of laboratories, field sites, and parents everywhere. The assignment was to assemble a safety kit, which, on the surface, sounds adorable, until you realize I've worked as a first responder, taken my share of animal science labs, and spend weekends voluntarily exposed to both the elements and feral wildlife. So while others were probably assembling cute first aid kits with cartoon bandages, I arrived with a full expedition-grade survival ensemble, complete with antiseptics, field dressings, and enough backup supplies to survive an extinction event. Naturally, the next assignment was to build a field kit, a twist worthy of Darwin himself. But since I'd already displayed mine in excessive glory, I simply unveiled my dogmobile/mobile lab, an adaptive research and rescue vehicle outfitted for anything short of tectonic upheaval. Was it overkill? Certainly, but in biology, redundancy is called adaptation, and I'm just doing my part to stay evolutionarily relevant. Figured I might just show you, I know this is excessive, my lab in the field kind of pre-set up thing. I'll put a list, of course, on the end of this video here, so you can, well, I'll put a partial list. It's excessive, like I said. Anyways, let's take a look around. This is my studio, and sorry about the mess. I've been working on a couple projects. So anyways, this is all glassware. I don't really use it a lot, but there it is, packed away when needed. Over here, we'll go back behind here. So let's see, paper towels. Here's the centrifuge, which I have not used yet. Microscope. We have baking soda as in case of fire chemical. We also have a fire extinguisher here. Lab coat. The gloves here. Goggles. Regular N95 mask. Those are my 3 main pieces of equipment that I would use for any lab stuff, regardless of what I was doing. And then just some other random stuff. We have alcohol swabs. We have microscope equipment. We have a chemistry 3D set in case we need to put something up. Different pipettes here. Here's the prepared slides that I wanted to get out and learn more about. Calculator, empty slides. Did we forget anything here? We have a notebook back here. I like the Rocket books because, they just import right to my cloud or drive or whatever. And we have a fan in case we need to blow anything out. I don't actually use this space for this because I have a table outside, but this is where I store it. Anyways, and then we'll move over to my field equipment stuff over here. And I'm also going to drop some pictures after we go over this of 3 boxes that are in my shed. One's for, actually, we'll do it right now. So we have a box that's kind of for hiking and long distance and what have you. We have an overnight kind of thing. And actually my van's set up to be a camper, but I can't really show you that right now. And then I have a water rescue thing and also kayak and paddleboard for those purposes. Anyways, so these are what we have here are my vet field bag stuff, because that's what I was studying prior. This is the stuff that I don't use as often. We have like dental tools. We have extra forceps. You'll see that I have some more accessibly. What is that? Oh, ENT diagnostic set. So we have a otoscope and stuff. We have blood pressure. That's at animal size. And then some wraps and suture kit and that sort of thing. And here, so again, not something that I use a lot, but if I were thinking I was going to go in the field, I'd take that with me. This is your, and I don't know if you can see that tactical vest, SWAT team kind of vest. Anyway, so this has more common first aid stuff, and it's mostly animal oriented, but there's also, you can see there, people oriented stuff, and then other random things. I think that's a tape measure. Yeah. So I know we have some wound sealer and such in here. And we have the more accessible, like forceps and needles and that sort of thing. And she need them over here. But honestly, I've had this out in a couple of years, so I don't know what's everything. I have a flashlight. I won't go through everything, like I said. And then walkie-talkies, power bank, a super bright light. This is also a power bank if needed too. Multi-purpose knife. I also carry a pocket knife on me. We have a UV IR light here, extra set of glasses for me, rescue scissors, and what have you, medic shears, I should say. This is a monoscope. And then normally I keep an Audubon field guide, but I lent it to someone, so I'm just going to show you this to say represent. I'd keep a field guide. Helmet, and this helmet has a camera and light built in. We have a solar charging flashlight with some rescue equipment on it. A lot of this lives in my car. Normally I keep my notebooks with stuff in here, but I haven't been using that lately, so that's moved on. We have a thing to hold your phone. We have bite and cut-proof gloves. Down here is some coveralls. And sorry about the lights. I'm growing some seeds here. And then this is an arm. It's like the bite-proof gloves, but it's for a whole arm. So, anyways, I normally, keep all that down in these boxes down here. So there's that. And like I said, I'll drop a list in, and hopefully that gives you a good idea where I'm at with the safety equipment procedures. Have a good one. Okay, welcome to my quote field kit, a minivan. Nothing special about it. We got it for going on excursions with our dogs, actually. So I'm going to show you how I have it set up, because this is actually how it is set up all the time. It's not contrived for this assignment or anything. But okay, girls are going to help with this one. So first thing first, this is kind of the field kit that we use for our excursions. We go on several times a week. Not much to it. We have waters. We have dog supplies, bags, treats, all the taser. Just run into any hostile critters. This is to pack it out with us. I have a hook here for multiple leashes, because I want to be as hands-free as possible when we're out. And then I have this little pouch that doesn't have anything here right now. You'll see what I mean, because I've chained that to it. All right, so a couple quick things to point out. All the stuff I showed last week as far as the lab gear and the safety gear and stuff can obviously go in here pretty easily. And I have 12-volt power inverters and such that can be used to run the microscope or anything like that. That's just jack and some tools for the car in case I need to do some repairs. There's a 12-volt inverter in there, you can see too. And then we have first aid stuff over here. Air compressor, jumper cable for standard vehicle stuff. Okay, so one thing I wanted to show was I have these seat back things that are all loaded up with different gear. I showed this book last week, and that's just representative. I normally have an Audubon guide. Anyway, so I would just grab stuff out of here or out of the pack that I would show you and put it in whatever I'm taking with me. Magnifying glasses. This is lenses for my phone camera in case I want to do, close-ups or far away. We have a solar flashlight. We have power bank lights, zip ties, glasses. You saw a lot of this stuff last week. Over here in the seat back, I'm usually sorry. Walkie-talkies and a police scanner type radio. We have some cold weather gear stuck under on that side. All right. And here in the front, we have a glove box that, believe it or not, has different kinds of gloves in it. Headlamp, and we have a local map of topographical map. I think it's important to point out that you can pre-download all the maps from Google or All Trails before setting out, so you don't need connection for that. Over here in the door, I don't think you can see it, but that's just emergency equipment like those medic shears, window brakes, seatbelt cover, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so one thing, this is for excursions. I have expedition gear, like I can convert this to a camper, air mattress, hanging lamps, window covers, all that kind of stuff. But that would be for a longer trip. So I'm just going to show you what I have for like a day trip kind of thing. Well, one thing I wanted to point out is that I don't like collect specimens. I just observe. So I'm not going to have little plastic paper. I already this picture a lot of pets. Anyways, this is like for pet. I'm ready to show you everything because there's like a warning check this and first in this first just the whole text and just has two pockets. That would be for short, medium, and interest. In addition, any dog that the dogs have their own setup too. So basically, what's in weird and standard hikery stuff, but that's simple, whether it's the waterproof gear. Real obviously showing more cold weather gear, that's in your problems. So paper and plastic bags for that, and you put that with flights. Another first aid kit, and then we got the warmer heaters, like towels for the hitchhiker out there. I saw the digital walkers and buckets. The idea. Extra shoelaces, some weird stuff, right? Sunblock, paracord, you get the those hiking camping tools. Same deal with older. So now this is your smaller tools. Pepper spray, about sports, the colors, and see. I'll make a mess. This is pretty cool about tool to do. Right. Anyway, if it has nothing to do with silver. Digital floss, such as yours. Yeah, we've got batteries, trail markers, compass. So I showed a lot in the key with all these in yardage. That's for me. Little milk glass. Anyway, you get the idea. So that's kind of my excursion setup, but I generally don't take it all out with me. I'll just, pick and choose, but in smaller packs. And as far as anything else to add, there's lots of toys, which are cool, but have all the necessities for a few days out. And that's it. Have a good week.
Now we move to the glamorous world of note-taking, cornerstone of academia and the sworn enemy of legible handwriting. The assignment: demonstrate effective note-taking habits. Easy enough, except I unfortunately treat notes like an art form. My earliest submission was a full production, diagrams, annotations, and aesthetic order that would make Mendel brush, which is ironic because with my aphantasia, drawing is just barely educated guesswork with extra labeling. Soon enough, I reverted to my natural scrawl, that familiar cryptographic scribble that future archaeologists will likely misinterpret as evidence of a lost civilization. But here's the thing. Note-taking isn't just about memory. It's biology in action. Neurons firing, synapses reinforcing, and serotonin rewarding the illusion of productivity. It's a ritual that keeps my brain limber and, theoretically, dementia-resistant. In my studio, I have boxes upon boxes of these handwritten fossils. Field notes, song lyrics, grocery lists, theoretical musings on the sentience of my cat. When I'm gone, my published work will be my epitaph, but these notebooks will be my genome.
This next story is about reproduction in the microbiome that is my yard. I wrote it as if Anthony Jeselnik were the docent at a really low-rent botanical garden. This video contains profanity, comparisons of nature to pornographic acts, and blatant disregard for good taste. Proceed at your own risk. If you're easily offended, save yourself the heartache of writing a negative comment that I'll never read and skip to the next section. If you choose to continue, check the box of tissues nearby. Welcome back to my backyard, nature's version of a cheap motel that charges by the hour. Every plant here is either trying to give up its flower, trying to spread its seed, or trying to ruin my life. Reproduction? Oh, they're doing it. Just badly. This is nature's version of a desperate singles bar at 1:58 a.m. Except instead of humans grinding on laminate flooring, it's plants yeeting DNA into the wind and praying something sticks. Let's start with the bay laurel, standing here like the prom king of trees. A smug, overgrown douche canoe who peaked sophomore year. Look at this narcissistic hunk of cellulose busting its nuts everywhere like it's auditioning for Jackass Arbor Day Edition.
I'm so tall, I can do whatever I want.
Congratulations, buddy. You're tall. So is every NBA player who's had 50 kids and gone bankrupt. Now, behold the maple, the laurel's pathetic sycophant. This tree practices reproduction like a teenager who just learned to paddle his pickle, ejaculating helicopter seeds across the yard like it's trying to knock up the entire postal code. Those big-ass Adam and Eve leaves? You're not fooling anyone, buddy. You're the equivalent of a guy trying to cover his burgeoning ear with a throw pillow. Let's look at your future. That's what happens when you get cocky. Karma, motherfucker. Moving on to the plant microkingdom's biggest sexual failure, the Marionberry. This thing wants to pop out some fair so badly it's basically standing on the street corner in a miniskirt yelling, "First come, first served." Birds eat it, rodents eat it, I eat it. This thing gets more unwanted oral action than a frat house pledge. This plant has had more things in and on it than your mom. And it still can't reproduce successfully, just like most people on Reddit, thankfully. Tomatoes and peppers, the mail order brides of the backyard, imported like they're part of an audition for 90 Day Fiancé. A perfect demonstration of how invasive species happen. Human stupidity wrapped in non-biodegradable packaging. Let's talk about the star jasmine, the most pornographic thing in this yard. This plant isn't pollinating. It's hosting a botanical so sticky the bees need emotional support groups afterward. It's blasting pollen everywhere like it's trying to give the whole backyard a This jasmine would get kicked off OnlyFans for violating community guidelines. And lurking like an Epstein client behind it all? Mint, the STD of herbs. I've chopped it, burned it, cursed at it, it still pops up like, "Miss me, daddy?" Mint is the reason therapists have wait lists. Here are the morning glories, heavenly blue, nature's way of telling you, yeah, these seeds will absolutely send you on a cosmic journey and make you question your childhood. They're dying back now, but they're leaving behind a seed stash big enough to start a cult. Next up, onions, garlic, the survivors. 2 seasons in this yard is like living through a documentary narrated by Morgan Freeman. I cut their flower heads off like some mad scientist running a backroom BDSM laboratory. I'm basically cutting their genitals off, and they just let me. Real sub energy. This catnip started as a sprig last spring. I threw the old flowers back in the pot like trash, and now it's Pablo Escobar's garden. Look at this furry junkie, eyes glazed like a Krispy Kreme donut. He's so high he's reached enlightenment. He knows the secrets of the universe now. He just can't articulate them because his brain is pudding. And he's a cat. Across the way is boxwood, the plant version of erectile dysfunction. It's green, it sits there, no charisma, no sex appeal, smells like piss. Does it even reproduce? Ah, okay. Through some underwhelming There's flowers that make celibacy look exciting. Even Google tried to change the subject. Boxwood is the missionary position with socks on of plants. Over here we see the majestic dog turd. Notice those little white strings? Those are baby dog turd larvae taking a ride on their mother's back. How adorable. Out front, the bees are having a full on the rosemary. It's a Hymenopterans crew. They're shaking and grinding like they got backstage passes to Coachella. Meanwhile, the rosemary is sitting there like,
Yes, finally, touch me.
and I'm getting ready to prune it so hard the plant will question its life choices. Imagine when someone shows up with hedge clippers. That's gardening, baby. And speaking of unwanted reproduction, this DEI hire patch of yard will not die. I've blasted it with salt, Roundup, vinegar, boiling water, anger, miso soup that tasted like feet. It comes back like... And finally, black bear, the Pacific Northwest's biological sex offender. This vine doesn't reproduce, it assaults. It climbs over the fence like it heard someone left the door unlocked. By July, it'll have gotten some on with my entire property. Of course, this being the Pacific Northwest, pro, free water year-round. Con, moss on every surface like pubic hair in your dad's Playboy. Moss on cracks, crevices, childhood drama, the concept of hope, moss and emotional wounds you thought you healed. If moss became a religion out here, it'd have a megachurch. But I'm doing my part. Trays of fern spars, technically more of a circle jerk. Tree trimmings I'm reanimating like a biological fluffer. Seedlings under grow lights. One of them might be weed. Big Brother said it was cool. And in the fridge, seeds undergoing stratification. A fancy term meaning chilling in the dark like my hopes and dreams. A botanical sperm bank plotting to ruin my spring schedule. And that, my friends, is the glorious, disgusting, endlessly horny cycle of reproduction in my backyard. A saga of desire, failure, and questionable biological safe words. Every plant here is desperate to breed, and I'm the only one stopping them from turning this yard into a botanical deep. In week 1 of this course, we saw a solitary bee habitat in the lecture slide deck. A simple little wooden box with holes. Minimalist, Spartan, functionally monastic, something like this. I've always wanted to keep a full apiary, one of those regal stacks of supers humming with Apis mellifera, the political prisoners of industrial agriculture. Unfortunately, my town forbids beehives, presumably because honeybees pose an imminent threat to capitalism or suburban property values. Yet, a wooden box drilled with cavities? Not technically illegal, and if bees choose to use it as a reproductive sanctuary, that's on them. I merely provide infrastructure. I'm the ecological landlord. But of course, I can't do anything on a modest scale. I'm constitutionally incapable of moderation. I go full Tim the Toolman Taylor, minus the misogyny and public relations baggage. So I'm building a 7-foot-tall pollinator habitat. Why 7 feet? Because subtlety's dead, and the pollinators deserve a monument. Let's begin. Reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Upcycling is not merely environmental stewardship, it's poetic redemption for lumber. I'm using scrap boards that have already lived multiple incarnations. First as building supplies, then as someone's donation to Habitat for Humanity, then as my supplies for furniture projects, and finally, this pile behind my shed. These planks have more character arcs than a Netflix miniseries. The outer frame will be assembled from 6-foot fence boards. Interior bracing comes from additional scraps. No need for architectural perfection. This isn't a load-bearing cathedral, it's merely an ecological condominium. I cut the rear panels at a 45-degree angle, so a roof could theoretically exist later. This will become relevant when I abandon the concept entirely. I attach a base piece so the entire structure can stand unaided. We're giving it legs, autonomy, self-determination. Then I glue together a block of boards for the central tower. Traditionally, you'd use untreated 4x4s, but mine are pressure treated and therefore toxic to insects. This is a pollinator sanctuary, not a super fun site. So I'm laminating 2x6 boards instead. Once cured, the block gets fastened like a vertebral column. Biomimicry meets reckless carpentry. I install a mid-level shelf to partition the space. This is the butterfly and moth breeding zone, the Ritz-Carlton of metamorphosis. Below it will be our larval substrate repository. Soil, sticks, woody detritus, everything that says eat, pupate, repeat. For the door, I route narrow slits, wide enough for butterflies, narrow enough to exclude predators. Ecologists call this selective permeability. I call it an insect velvet rope. I'll add twigs and branches so they have surfaces to cling to, just like they would in their natural environment, the diminishing, anthropogenically degraded one. Above the block, I'm inserting bamboo tubes of varying diameters, because solitary bees are discerning real estate consumers. Some species prefer 8mm cavities, some prefer 5mm, and some don't care as long as there are no mites crawling inside like tiny parasitic landlords. Cut the bamboo at the node or arrange longer pieces against the back to seal them. I vary the lengths to create landing platforms, but not enough to invite birds. We're providing housing for pollinators, not facilitating avian crime. Time for hole making. Different hole diameters for different taxa. Mason bees, leafcutter bees, and other solitary species with niche preferences. I drill at a slight upward angle to avoid moisture accumulation, because water plus bees equals fungal contagion. Commercial bee blocks present symmetrical rows like precision dentistry, but bees aren't interested in modernist design theory. They evolved in dead trees, not suburban neighborhoods. So I'm drilling with organized chaos. The bees won't complain. They're too busy preventing planetary collapse. Originally, I envisioned a hinge roof for storage. Then inspiration struck. A rooftop garden. A pollinator habitat with a pollinator habitat on top. Ecological recursion. So I drilled drainage holes on the upper platform and at the base where the substrate moisture can collect. I'll waterproof these with Flex Seal to keep the wood from decomposing prematurely. This isn't a rustic art project. We want it to survive longer than the current climate policies. Below the butterfly penthouse, I build another shelf and add a vertical divider. This creates multiple substrate compartments for different developmental stages and life forms. Soil, wood chips, dried plant matter. Basically the insect version of a Montessori classroom. And here's where we temporarily surrender. A 7-week barrage of rain, fog, and Pacific Northwestern indifference has forced me to pause. This assignment is due, and even the most committed ecologists cannot stop meteorology. What's left? I'll fabricate a fine mesh screen door for predator exclusion, add more bamboo, fill the screw holes, sand, seal, and generally disguise mistakes, and in the meantime, wait for 2 consecutive days of sunlight, which may require ritual sacrifice or bargaining with inscrutable weather gods. Then we'll be prepared for tenants, bees, butterflies, beetles, tiny winged proletarians engaged in the thankless labor of pollination. All they ask for is shelter. The least we can do is provide it, considering humanity's ongoing effort to destroy every ecosystem they inhabit.
My sample here in my backyard, and I mentioned in the previous assignment, I have 4 gardens, and this is what I call the interior garden. It's right off my back patio here. Look at all that biodiversity out here. Most of the gardens have themes. This one doesn't. And when we bought this house, this whole area was concrete, and I didn't want that for the dogs. So I took the concrete out and started some grass. Well, so this is why this is interesting, because I actually know all about this, but I don't know anything about it on a micro level. So I staked off a specific area here, and I chose it because it does have a little more diversity than just going right here in the middle of the grass or whatever. This is a 2-foot by 2-foot square making up this grass area, which is 18 by 9 feet. Okay, let's look closer. So first, let's talk about the substrate that it's on, because I put it down myself. I'm going to show you the edge here. So you can kind of see that dirty edge. That's to where the concrete was. And it was a couple inches thick. And then there still is several inches of gravel underneath that mixed in with the soil. I dug up about 2 inches solid gravel to get to where we're at now. And as you can see, there's still quite a bit of mixed in. It's got some natural soil in there, and it's also got some garden soil that I mixed in. We can focus. There we go. And so, you can see that's your standard outdoor garden soil that has like pieces of bark and other composted organic matter in it. It's got some natural soil here. Here's the more natural soil, or the soil, I should say, that was already in the yard before I added to it. Sorry about the focus here. Oh, you know what? There we go. But that's like dog hair. That doesn't count. Well, it does. But anyways, we see the differences in the soil here. And I've also recently added, you don't really see it much in this area, so we won't consider it our sample, but I'm adding stuff like sand here too recently. Okay, so I can also tell you that there's at least 4 kinds of grass in this yard because I put the seed down myself. However, some has thrived and some has not so much. I mean, and without it flowering, we can't really tell what it all is. At least I can't. I'm not so good at it. Some of the ones where I come from in Central California, where it's much more dry, I can't identify. Anyway, and see, we got one over here that's like more of a clumping kind, but this is just like some Pacific Northwest mixes I tried, and one wasn't so great, so I tried another. So at least 4 kinds of grasses going on here, but again, like some thrive and some don't, and we can see underneath here where it's drying out. So let's get up closer even still if we can. See what else we have in here. Oh, so we should point out that we have some decomposing matters. And well, there's a maple seed and some various leaves. Here's some leaves from the boxwood above us here. And we've got the cedar right there. Well, there's something coming in. That is moss rose. And that's actually found its way from up here where it was planted intentionally. Okay. Let's look at some other little plants growing on in here. So the clover, which goes all over my yard. So I do want to point out that I mentioned I marked that area because I like that it has some variety to it. But as we move around the yard here, you can see, I'm going to move around the perimeter. We've got all these different kind of like opportunistic plants trying to make their way in and such. That was a seed pod from it. I don't remember what that thing is back there. We've got some mint over here. Let's see. Oh, we've got these fun guys that are hard to get rid of. Over here we got a different kind of creepy crawly. Anyway, so the whole point is to say that no matter where I choose in the yard, even if I were to choose right in the center, honestly, none are going to be a great representative sample of the entire area. But that said, we will get some good sample data that represents both the edges and the grass itself, hopefully. Okay, here's what I decided to do since I have to go overboard with everything, apparently. I staked out a 1x1 square in the middle of everything. So what I'm thinking is I'll get 2 representative samples. I'll get one over here on the edge, which will show more of the diversity of what's going on. Then I'll get one right here in the center that would represent that there's 162 dogs in my yard right now. So it's 162 square feet total. The perimeter, as I measured it out with this mixed, if we were to represent that all the way around as it goes, then that represents 41% of our total space, where the grass only represents 59% of our total space. So this 4 square foot area over here is going to represent 16.5% of our sample size, whereas this little 1 square foot over here is going to represent 1.04% of our sample size. Okay, so there's a couple other little tests I want to do here. Because I had mentioned I put down several kinds of grass seed and don't know what's taking and what's not. I can tell you that this is definitely like stuff that I have to reseed or that it seeds because it's not shooting out rhizomes. And I grew up in kind of the, place with all the fires. I don't know if you call it Intermountain, I guess, in California by the national parks. And I can identify those grasses there, as I may have mentioned. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cruise down here. And I'm going to put my phone away while I do this, but just to give you an idea, I'm going to grab a blade from, let's say, 10 different areas here as I go around, and I'll try to make it like just uniformly around the sample. Then I'm going to take those in the lab and look at them in the microscope and see if I can identify them as being different. The other thing I'm going to do, and I'll put the phone away for this, and I've never done this before, so we'll see how it goes, is I'm going to attempt to make a core sample. Especially because I know what I put down on here, and I know what the ground was like before. It'd be interesting to see. Okay, so my attempt at a core sample was not very successful. I think I need to use a better apparatus, but like I said, gotta try it out. I did get down a few inches, like below the roots of the grass, though, so we can kind of see, how it differs, the richness of the soil, how things are broken down more down there. I would have liked to get a little deeper, but say la vie, right? If I had been more successful with my sample, or if I wanted to test just that first couple inches I got, here's the equation I would use. Okay, here we are in my studio or lab. I've got my samples, and I finally get to try on my little travel field microscope, which I got because it can work on USB or battery power or whatever, and it's super light and compact and everything. So, fun little toy. So, I'm going to look at all these, and I'm going to see how they look different and the same. Okay, so I can say visually observing these, they look a little bit different. Like some of them are more needle-like, and some of them are a little more flat. Now, does that mean that they just haven't opened up yet? I don't know. I don't know that much about them. I'm going to put up on the screen right now a couple of that I looked at. I don't know enough about plant cells to tell us, so I'd have to look this information up. But I am collecting data just to collect data here.
This next section is based on modules 8A and 8B, which have to do with data collection, analysis, and visualization. In the first part of this experiment, I'll estimate the organism population inside my house and disseminate that data by both population distribution and biomass distribution maps, charts, and figures. A couple of key points about the data I'm using. The exact microorganism mass is not measurable by me. Data on average in-home biomass varies wildly. A more verifiable number I found was the average outdoor microorganism biomass being around 1% of dry weight, not accounting for climate region. The studies I found also note that indoor areas often have less organisms due to cleaning procedures, filtration, etc. My home has almost exclusively non-porous surfaces and floors, giving microorganisms less habitat and making cleaning more effective. We have objectively higher cleaning standards, given my anecdotal experience providing field services in people's homes. However, there are some items that may have a higher microorganism count, like litter boxes, pet beds, and dog toys. For the sake of this comparison, I'll be estimating the overall microorganism biomass liberally at 0.5% globally, with estimated variations for each room and 1% microorganism biomass for macroorganisms. To limit the lengthiness of figures getting out of control, I'm limiting the number of microorganisms per room to 10 million, despite the number likely being much higher. The visual representations will still show the extremity of the data effectively. Likewise, I can't or won't weigh the spiders and insects, so measurements are based on average weight found online for species or similar sized species of the same class or order. Larger animals were weighed on a bathroom scale, and pounds to the nearest tenth converted to grams. I'll be using the average figure for animals' dry weight being 30% of live weight when accounting for symbiotic organism biomass. This is a map of the survey area, or my house, with no data. If we look at the organism distribution by biomass, we can see it leans significantly towards the larger macroorganisms, such as humans, dogs, and cats, with arachnids, insects, and plants making up a smaller percentage, and microorganisms making up an insignificant percentage. This bar graph shows distribution of organisms by biomass and room. The next chart shows the same thing. I just thought it looked cool. And finally, we go back to the map of my house, and we can see the distribution by biomass and room at the time I collected the data. Now, conversely, if we compare that by population, we see that the microorganisms make up 99.99+% of the total population, with all of the macroorganisms making up 0.001% or less of the total population. In a similar bar graph, we can see distribution by room and population number. Of course, we don't see anything besides the microorganisms here because nothing else makes up a significant enough percentage. If we go to the map of the house, we can see it a little bit better, but only because I enlarged the population representations to a 1-pixel shared line. If we zoom in, we can even see the gradient on some of those lines. Next, let's compare that to some data representations from other studies. The data I'm sharing here comes from an essay I wrote last term on the effects of environmental racism and mental health, which I've included in this portfolio. My sources are considered academically first here, and then through university papers and released by reputable publishers. However, they're all aggregate studies of existing data, so they should be more neutral than the primary source. While the integrity of the information is solid, being peer-reviewed and published in established journals, this should be more neutral than lower-tier secondary source such as a magazine or website with an agenda. Also, unlike most people, I prefer to read the scientific jargon. I like to look at data like this for accuracy and explanation. Still, their papers include some great data visualizations, which is what we'll take a look at. These first charts come from the same study by researchers from the University of Oslo and Oxford University, where they compile and analyze 71 studies on mental health and environmental factors. In addition to being worked on by many researchers from prominent universities, it was published by American psychologists, lending an additional peer-reviewed credibility. These two charts represent the same data set in different ways, the correlation between different environmental factors and mental health. I find these studies interesting because I'm an advocate for better mental health care and also deconstructing the systems surrounding preventable mental illness. I'm also passionate about preserving the environment and the human-caused damages, so this covers two things I like to learn more about. This second chart comes from the environmental fact sheet created by the University of Michigan Center for Sustainable Systems. Again, a university-based study based on a large battery of other research. It shows the results on clickable plots. You can see the inset data for Guinea in this one. This shows correlation between peoples of different cultures and technological or resource availability and how they're impacted by climate change. Like the first study, it interests me because it combines empirical science with a compassionate, human-centered approach. Now, before we get into the fun part of looking at animals, here's some references to fill your brain hole with. For the past 25 years, I've been engaged in an ongoing experiment in survival. Not my own, unfortunately. That would have been simpler. No, I've spent a quarter century ensuring that various other organisms continue respiring, metabolizing, and occasionally shitting on my furniture. It began innocently enough. A dog here, a bird there, a growing sense of moral obligation, and before I knew it, my life had become an ecosystem, complete with apex predators, decomposers, and one very confused human trying to hold it all together with duct tape and empathy. I've had over a dozen dogs. Most live long, fulfilling lives full of enrichment, adventure, and expensive vet bills. Others required palliative care, an experience that taught me patience, compassion, and how to administer medication to a creature that could possibly dismantle a bear. I've also raised chickens, the domestic velociraptor, who reminded me that even animals with brains the size of walnuts can form complex social hierarchies and hold grudges. Then there were the horses and cattle. For a time, I lived on and supervised a ranch, which is a bit like living in a biology textbook that occasionally tries to kick you. Cows are fascinating creatures, sentient lawnmowers who are somehow both majestic and constantly sticky. Birds, though. Birds are where I truly lost control. I've hand-fed dozens of chicks, gently introducing them to the human world. They imprinted on me, which sounds adorable until you realize you can't leave the house without being followed by a tiny screaming dinosaur who thinks you're God. And then there were the kittens. 4 of them, each bottle fed from 1 day old, which is, scientifically speaking, a terrible idea. It's like volunteering for sleep deprivation research, but with claws. Still, they survived, thrived, and now rule my household with the quiet tyranny only cats can manage. But let's talk about flora. My garden is ambitious. The goal to cultivate a complete self-sustaining ecosystem in my backyard. From soil microbes and fungi to pollinators to birds and possibly myself if I forget to go inside. It's a living model of ecological interaction. Fungi decompose, the insects pollinate, the spiders monitor the pest populations, and I, in turn, monitor the spiders from a respectful distance. Each plant, each organism, each self-inflicted science project teaches me something new about resilience, adaptation, and the futility of trying to keep slugs off cabbage. I've studied animal science and zoology formally, 3 years of undergraduate coursework that taught me 2 invaluable lessons. 1, nature doesn't care about your schedule, and 2, neither do cows. Outside of academia, I've continued my education through books, fieldwork, and late-night Google searches that begin with, "Is it normal if?" and end with mild existentialism. My passion for animal welfare shapes nearly every consumer choice I make. From food to textiles, I try to support systems that don't exploit the organisms involved. Ironically, this has made me both ethically consistent and chronically underfed. So what have I learned from my 25 years of biological babysitting? That life, in all its forms, is fundamentally unreasonable. It multiplies without permission, it dies without warning, and it insists on doing both in your general direction. But there's something almost poetic in that chaos. Each creature, from the cat on my keyboard to the fungus in my compost, participates in a grand, disorderly experiment called existence. I'm merely the overworked lab assistant trying to keep the specimens fed and the data legible. Sometimes I think of my backyard as a living diorama of natural selection. The strong survive, the weak adapt, and I keep buying birdseed. My tomatoes thrive on neglect, my orchids die from love, and I still haven't figured out which lesson I'm supposed to take from that. I suppose, in a way, it's comforting. To care for life is to accept that you can't control it, only collaborate with it. A kind of mutualistic détente. I provide shelter, food, and occasional commentary in return. My organisms allow me to feel useful. It's symbiosis by pity. So yes, after all this time, I've learned to embrace the triumphs, the tragedies, the endless cleaning of habitats that are somehow still dirty. It's part of the grand design, or lack thereof. Join me next time as we explore another vital branch of applied biology, negotiating with raccoons, or how to lose a garbage war in 3 nights. Until then, remember, life, finds a way, usually into your house.
This is a video slideshow based on our 7 Steps media project in which we were to select a field location and prepare to visit it. While visiting it, we were to make observations and document those. The site I selected is a lesser used trail near Alsea Falls. It doesn't go to the falls, so it attracts less hikers and tourists. I've been on the trails in this area several times, so I'm familiar with them already. That said, I do have the maps downloaded to my phone, as service can be spotty or non-existent.
I rarely go off trail, and if I do, I follow natural game trails. The temperature is usually lower than in the Willamette Valley, and the humidity is often high, especially after rainfall. This area is up to 1,340 feet elevation with a dense canopy. Insulated pants and jacket may be required year-round, as well as weatherproof boots. Otherwise, it's a short trek, so I just take the bat belt from my field kit, water, dog supplies, basic multi-tool and knife, my phone, and my dogs, of course, because they love these kinds of hikes, and they can also use their superior senses to help find life, like birds and small mammals. I will be setting out along the southeast Bering Trail. I don't know the exact distance I'll be traveling, and I've never taken the trail to its terminus, but my route is usually about 60 to 90 minutes out and back. Also, I verified the roads are clear. On arrival, there are no immediately apparent safety concerns. The trailhead appears to be in good shape, and I don't see or hear any damaged trees. There are no cars in the parking lot, so I don't expect to run into other dogs on the narrow trail, which is always a consideration. This is arguably the least interesting part of the tour, as it's in a clearing and the trail with the dense forest doesn't start for a couple hundred meters. There's a small creek that runs parallel to the trail. It has little growth around it, possibly from additional human contact being right by the road, or due to less trees and other plants to provide shade, nutrients, or to prevent erosion. According to my phone, it's 42 degrees Fahrenheit. It's cool, but not biting cold, as can sometimes be the case at the same temperature in the valley. The air is moist, and there is little observable wind. I would refer to this area as a temperate rainforest. This trail runs in a relatively north to southeast to northeast direction in a valley alongside a creek. To the north, behind me, the trail inclines to the falls and has several known junctions that I can't see from here. To the west, there is a bit of a gap in the canopy in the valley where the road comes through, and then a more subtle uphill incline. To the east, or my left as I travel, is a steeper incline with moderate canopy that will become denser as I head along my route. The creek sits approximately 10 feet below and 5 to 10 feet to the right of the trail, though it deviates away midway through my route and then back near it again before I reach the end of my path near the convergence of the creeks. The red dots show my approximate path. One of the reasons I frequent this trail, besides its seclusion, is due to its biodiversity. I call it Jurassic Park in places where there are massive moss-covered coniferous trees darkening the forest and ferns as tall as I am up on the hillside. The lower shrub leaf layers are so dense in most places that leaving the path may be more difficult than dangerous, as it's easy terrain to navigate back to the creek or trail. At least speaking for myself as an avid outdoor person, I shouldn't speculate on an inexperienced hiker's ability to navigate this terrain. As the path continues, there are a lot of areas with decomposing branches or fallen logs that are rich with growth. Moss, ferns, anything that can get a foothold. There are probably a lot of insects in there and in the ground or forest floor. I mentioned previously that I'm a look-don't-touch adventurer, so I won't be digging around and disrupting their habitat. I spend a lot of my walk observing the trail and the areas immediately surrounding it, so as not to step on or disrupt anything. I'll feel guilty for a week for stepping on a snail. This trail is often ripe with overripe banana slugs, which is interesting because I come from California and always thought banana slugs only came in yellow. I can hear a variety of birds, but not a cacophony, though I don't see many. There's a lot of interaction between the different life forms and their environment beyond just the fallen trees and logs. For one, the density and diversity of the floor layer provides an excellent biosphere for all forms of moss, fungi, ferns, shrubs, insects, rodents, and bacteria. It's wet and warmish. I've never seen any reptiles on this trail, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Due to little human interference, the decomposition process happens naturally and routinely. There's a clean and plentiful water supply nearby. The trees provide moisture and temperature insulation for the lower layers. This also produces a localized water cycle. As moisture from the air condenses in the canopy, it precipitates back to the forest floor. Even though it's not raining, there's a steady form of rain happening in areas of the trail. I note that this whole mountain is basically logging land and roads, or Bureau of Land Management. So that leads me to believe that despite the natural appearance of the area, there has been a history of human interference. Dedicated spaces like the Alcea Recreation Area aren't actively being logged, of course, though when driving from the valley, you can see sections of hillside that have been recently cleared. As far as my more immediate area, I mentioned that this trail is little used when compared to others in the area. Still, it's an established trail, but I like it because it feels more natural than many of the trails in the Lane, Lynn, and Benton counties that I've been to. I've visited this trail about 7 times in the 2 years I've lived in Oregon, and it's always cleared no matter the season, which is either being done naturally or pseudo-naturally by hikers and wildlife, or some sort of trail management service. The main falls trails are actively maintained, but there's less evidence of that on this trail, as far as trimmed branches, sawed logs, trail markers, and other evidence of human interference. There are paved roads nearby and some parking lots, campgrounds, and restrooms in the general area, give or take half a mile. There's little in the way of litter, lost belongings, or other signs of human use on this trail aside from it being maintained.
Remember Alf? He's back in pod form.
Remember Spirograph? It's back, and in exactly the same form. If you played with this as a kid, you know it's only good for one thing. Makeshift ninja stars. No, it creates patterns. Something my young and old autistic mind takes great pleasure in. For this experiment, we drew some patterns with the spirograph and attempted to match them to the patterns in nature. When we discovered there are way more patterns in nature than beginner spirograph designs, we switched course and found some patterns in nature and tried to recreate them as best we could using only these little plastic wheels. Let's take a look at a few of them. Well, that's about as basic as it gets. A star. Starfish? Maybe you're thinking? Think smaller. We can get a little more complex with our star pattern. This one kind of reminds me of a sunflower. If we want to get really crazy with our pattern, here's another star. I think we've all seen this one in nature before, or in nature videos at least. Now, this is a strange one. What could it be? This flower is a favorite of ours, and the pollinators in our garden. You've probably seen this one lining the aisles of every retail store in December. This pattern looks like one of the annuals we put out for the bees. And finally, we can even see patterns in our breakfast. So grab a pen, make some circles, and see what patterns you can find.
Perception, the fine art of interpreting reality before it escapes. In the biological sense, perception is less about what we would see and more about what our brain insists we saw. A charming little evolutionary quirk that explains both optical illusions and most of human history. I've learned that my dogs are exceptional collaborators in this department. Their pinnae, these glorious satellite dishes of mammalian design, detect subtleties I'd never notice. A snap of a twig, the faint scent of rabbit musk, the existential dread of a passing squirrel. Their bodies are finely tuned instruments, and I am the lucky primate trying to keep up. Together, we make a decent hybrid organism. My vision, their hearing, our mutual ADHD. So for this piece, I strapped a camera to Lena, my most scientifically curious dog, and let her guide the fieldwork. What follows is a cross-species documentary experiment. Part behavioral study, part home movie, and entirely proof that dogs experience the world on a level of sensory grandeur we can only imagine. And sometimes, quite literally, can't smell. I slowed this down by 50% to help with her erratic movements. Hopefully I'll stabilize the next one better. Enjoy. This story is about reproduction, consumption, and the relentless hustle of life in a modest suburban garden. It's not, strictly speaking, a romance novel, though the flora are flirtatious, the insects indiscreet, and the occasional vertebrae occasionally enthusiastic. It is, however, a tale of ambition, biology, and the sometimes tragicomic pursuit of survival. Here, flowers advertise with the subtlety of neon signs and the covert deceit of marketing interns. Pollinators arrive with all the enthusiasm and poor judgment of partygoers at a cocktail hour. Herbivores graze with the delicate diplomacy of accountants on a bender. And predators, whether spider, bird, or mantis, execute energy transactions with the efficiency that would make even the most hardened economist blush. If you're easily offended by innuendo or humor that flirts with impropriety, you may wish to avert your eyes, or at least keep a scholarly, straight face. For everyone else, prepare to witness a garden where nectar flows like gossip, leaves are chewed with subtle suggestions, and death itself is just another form of intimacy. This is not a guide to botany, nor is it a cautionary tale. It is, if anything, a field report from a universe that mistakes reproduction for performance art, consumption for foreplay, and the relentless march of life for a scandalously entertaining narrative. And thus the cycle begins. Again.
The Garden of Earthly Frictions, a natural history of bad behavior. On a dark and stormy night, an enigmatic flower bud stirred under the muted scrutiny of the moon. She was encased in a cocoon of sepals, modest yet tense like a debutante on the eve of a scandalous ball. When conditions aligned, humidity, light, and whatever internal hormonal chaos plants experience, the sepals peeled back with the slow, deliberate grace of a misbehaving librarian, revealing a blossom designed not for subtlety, but for influence. The petals themselves were a study in biological seduction, vibrant in ultraviolet patterns that screamed, "I am free, I am fertile, I will take what I can get." At her center rose the carpel, a monument so phallic in design that an undergraduate might blush, yet entirely female in function. Crowning the style, the stigma glistened with mucilage, receptive and smug, a bioadhesive invitation to any sufficiently pollen-laden suitor. Surrounding her, the stamens quivered on their filaments, anthers swollen with ambition, shedding pollen into the breeze with all the subtlety of a billboard for reproductive opportunity. The flower could self-pollinate, but she didn't. Selfing is the botanical equivalent of dating your cousin. Efficient, but frowned upon outside a few rural counties, and certainly not good for your reputation. Cross-pollination was riskier, but infinitely more rewarding, evolutionarily speaking, and thus she waited. Enter Apis mellifera, the fur-covered libertine and unrepentant courier of gametes. He approached the corolla like an intern at a cash bar, buzzing with nervous energy and magnetic charge. His legs brushed the anthers. Pollen clung to his thorax with all the subtlety of a clingy ex. Oblivious, he zipped to the next flower, unknowingly completing the transaction the first flower had so patiently engineered. Cross-pollination, nature's original dating app with zero privacy settings. Not all pollinators were as conscientious. A hummingbird, metabolic rate off the charts, hovered like a caffeinated winged narcissist, plunging his bill into deep corollas and leaving a dusting of pollen in his wake. He was fast, flashy, and entirely selfish, a vivid reminder that beauty is a strategic investment in survival. Meanwhile, butterflies fluttered in, their visits languid and performative, sipping nectar like aristocrats at a buffet and rarely bothering to deposit pollen with any discernible intent. Beetles arrived, chewing petals indiscriminately, disrupting delicate reproductive machinations with the subtlety of a bull in a florist shop. By mid-morning, the garden was in full swing. Bees carried pollen like giggling teenagers smuggling contraband. Hummingbirds made aerial laps of vacillating intent. Butterflies and beetles performed their own disinterested rituals. And the plants, draped in chemical signals, whispered to each other in volatile compounds, gossiping about who had visited, who had been faithful, and who had completely ignored protocol. Evolution, as ever, treated all of this as a logistical problem rather than a moral one. Beneath the drama, roots intertwined with fungi in the soil, exchanging carbon and nutrients with the efficiency of a well-staffed lab. Injured plants sent chemical warnings like mass emails gone viral. Beware the caterpillars, they are sticky, persistent, and emotionally complicated. Even in the dark subterranean world, the scandal continued. By afternoon, the flower's ovary quietly began to swell. Fertilization occurred discreetly, invisible to all but the most attentive eyes. Love, sex, and reproductive success were messy, chaotic, and entirely impersonal. Nature, as always, was both brilliant and cruel. With pollination behind her, the flower, proud and slightly euphoric, found herself under siege, the buffet opened without invitation. The caterpillar arrived first, jaw muscles flexing with the zeal of a culinary critic. He chewed through leaves with rhythmic devotion, a larval gourmand in a world without table manners. The plant, unable to scream in any audible sense, released a bouquet of volatile organic compounds, invisible SOS signals that nearby plants intercepted and responded to with their own chemical arsenals. Alkaloids, tannins, and latex surged through her tissues, a defensive cocktail designed to discourage further nibbling. The caterpillar, equipped with the proper enzymes, was largely unfazed. Nature, it seemed, considered resilience sexy. Aphids joined the fray, piercing the foam and sucking sap with relentless, parthenogenic vigor. They reproduced without males, without shame, and without consulting their hosts. Effectively a botanical Ponzi scheme. Ants soon arrived, attracted to the honeydew excreted by the aphids, stroking their abdomens to coax out more droplets. The aphids tolerated it. The ants clearly enjoyed it. Mutualism, in this case, was indistinguishable from organized debauchery. The plant, injured but not defeated, activated further defenses. Jasmonic acid triggered latex exudation, sticky, bitter, and very effective at discouraging mouthparts. Nearby predatory wasps interpreted the chemical signals as invitations to hunt. They deposited eggs inside caterpillars, converting herbivores into incubation chambers. Revenge, measured in nitrogen-rich larvae, is often the sweetest kind. Meanwhile, grazers arrived. Rabbits nibbled stems with the tenderness of someone who thought decorum mattered, while deer sampled buds like they were tasting fine wine. Each act of consumption redistributed nutrients, energy, and occasionally dignity. Seeds were dispersed when birds swallowed fruit whole, ensuring the next generation would begin life distant from parental scorn. Below ground, nematodes, fungi, and microbes exploited the wounded roots, siphoning nutrients in the silent, patient way that only soil organisms can. Life, it seemed, continued whether anyone consented or not. By nightfall, the garden had been transformed. Leaves were perforated, buds bruised, and petals trampled in a haze of ecological excess. Yet beneath the apparent chaos, energy moved predictably up and down the food chain. Every bite, sting, and slurp was a transfer of resources, a transaction executed without moral concern. As darkness fell, the garden's daytime dramas gave way to the nocturnal economy of predation. A spider's web shimmered like a suspended contract. Insects blundered into sticky silk with tragic inevitability. The spider, patient and precise, wrapped her catches with clinical efficiency. Predation is nothing if not negotiation without negotiation. The prey provides biomass, the predator converts it to energy, and the web benefits from selective pruning of population. Nearby, a praying mantis waited like a nun attending mass, devouring suitors with the same deliberate grace one might use to grade student papers. Post-copulatory decapitation, while brutal, efficiently recycles nitrogen into the reproductive output. Love and protein transfer in this ecosystem are indistinguishable. Birds contributed as well. Robins hunted worms, chickadees nabbed caterpillars, and the local hawk maintained order with aerodynamic impunity. Apex predators, cats, foxes, occasional raccoons kept populations in check, maintaining the balance between chaos and stability, destruction and nourishment. Inevitably, all this carnage funneled into decomposition. Fungi invaded fallen leaves and decaying stems with enzymatic appeal. Bacteria followed with flagella whips and chemical cocktails, and earthworms churned it all into nutrient-rich soil. Nothing was wasted. The detrital network ensured that yesterday's excess fueled tomorrow's productivity. Life and death are merely two phases of the same nutrient exchange, often more intimate than any pollination. Rains seep through soil layers, delivering dissolved molecules back to plant roots. Mycorrhizal networks varied carbon, nitrogen, and gossip alike. Who had been fertilized, eaten, or decomposed. The garden's scandalous cycles continued invisibly with patience and precision. By dawn, new buds had begun to form, tight and hopeful, ready to repeat the entire sequence of seduction, consumption, predation, and decay. The flower from the beginning, now fruiting and fertilized, looked on quietly. Life persisted not because it was moral, dignified, or polite, but because it was relentless, resourceful, and very, very good at getting what it wanted. Somewhere in the soil, microbes burped contentedly. Above them, petals unfurled to the sun, and the garden, in all its chaotic, scandalous glory, whispered to the morning, "Back to work."
In the beginning, long before taxes, influencers, or the concept of pants, life began in the ocean. For eons, things swam, drifted, and politely bumped into each other, the biological equivalent of speed dating. Then one ambitious fish looked at the horizon and thought, you know what? I could make this worse. And thus began life's greatest misadventure, the crawl from sea to land, the evolutionary equivalent of leaving a rent-controlled apartment to find yourself. Those early pioneers, the tetrapods, dragged themselves onto land, grew lungs, limbs, and eventually the arrogance to look down on the ocean. They became reptiles, birds, mammals, all the usual suspects. Until, about 50 million years ago, one group of mammals looked around, sniffed the air, and said, you know what? This sucks. And they went back. Meet Pakicetus, the original prototype whale, a land mammal dabbling in swimming like it's a new hobby. It looked vaguely wolf-shaped and had the energy of something not quite sure what it's doing with its life. It could walk, swim, and let's be honest, probably sucked at both. But it was evolution's first draft, and nature, bless her heart, never proofreads. Next came Ambulocetus, the walking whale. Imagine a crocodile that just discovered Pilates. Its limbs could support it on land, but barely. Its tail was stronger, but not by much. It lived in eternal limbo, the evolutionary version of not knowing what to do after college. Over generations, it leaned more aquatic. Limbs shortened, tails widened, nostrils crept up the skull. Evolution's subtle way of saying, maybe stick to swimming. And then came Basilosaurus, the first fully aquatic whale. Despite the name, it wasn't a lizard, just an enormous, slightly horrifying mammal pretending to be one. It reached 60 feet long, nature's lifted truck overcompensation phase, but it still had tiny hind legs, vestigial reminders of its land-loving past, like evolution's version of that one box of keepsakes you refused to throw away. By now, the transition was complete. Land was dead to them. The ocean, once abandoned, was home again, and this time they came with better lungs and no shame. From there, evolution went wild. Some whales developed baleen plates, transforming into gentle, krill-sucking behemoths. Others evolved echolocation and started hunting in coordinated pods, because when dolphins unionize, things get serious. Today, whales are brilliant, social, and inconveniently aware. They sing, navigate, and occasionally star in documentaries designed to make humans cry into their reusable shopping bags. Their hearts are the size of compact cars, their brains enormous, their judgment of human behavior immeasurable. The whale's evolution isn't a story of progress, it's a story of preference. They left the sea, conquered land, evolved everything necessary to survive, and then decided they'd rather not. That's not regression, that's insight. Because evolution isn't a ladder, it's more like a drunk improvisation. Sometimes it works, sometimes you invent the platypus. So when you see a whale breach, remember, you're witnessing 50 million years of trial, error, and exquisite backpedaling. Evolution's greatest lesson? It's not survival of the fittest. It's survival of the ones who know when to leave the party. Gather around the taxonomic campfire, for tonight's species of interest is Homo carnivorus hypocriticus, a bipedal omnivore known for preaching compassion while simultaneously asking for its steak to be medium rare. Our subject has achieved remarkable feats in science and technology, split the atom, mapped the genome, and even taught cows to text their GPS coordinates to satellites, but still struggles with the elementary ethics of feeding itself. The global beef industry isn't just about dinner. It's a case study in the intersection of biology, culture, and self-delusion. Around the world, we sanctify some animals, barbecue others, and rationalize the whole affair through the convenient lens of tradition. In the name of progress, we've engineered cows to grow faster, fatter, and calmer, while quietly outsourcing the moral consequences to distance and packaging. This is the essence of a scientific and cultural paradox. Our values, compassion, stewardship, responsibility collide spectacularly with our appetites, and nowhere is this collision more visible than on the small, independently operated ranches where good intentions meet bad information and the scientific method goes to die. So where is the beef? It's not just on the plate. It's in the ethics of our species, the contradictions of our culture, and the quiet suffering of creatures who, through no fault of their own, were born into humanity's ongoing experiment in selective empathy. The difficulty in addressing any animal welfare issue is that we, as a species, have not made any agreement or definition as to what animal welfare really means. People, for the most part, have decided what one should or shouldn't do to another person, at least in a relatively broad sense. Whether this is due to religion, legislation, or other causes is far too messy to be deciphered. Conversely, these same rules, when applied to animals, are often ambiguous and vary between cultures, religions, and even individuals. Like human rights issues, people's thoughts on animals are also a product of religion, legislation, and time. Philosophically, animal rights and welfare present one of the greatest paradoxes people are faced with in a civilized society. In 2014, the National Council for Animal Protection reported that 85% of American adults support animal protection causes, with 90% of those respondents stating that animals should be protected from all suffering and harm caused by humans. This is an increase of 19% from 2005, so it could be reasonably extrapolated that those numbers have increased further between 2014 and 2022. Given this data, it should be reasonable for Americans to expect that animals raised for their own consumption are treated compassionately and protected from harm. Hundreds of laws have been enacted at the federal, state, and local levels to ensure the minimum humane treatment available to these animals, at least the best that can be expected from an economically and politically viable standpoint. In fact, it's not uncommon to find production animals who receive better treatment than many people's dogs, cats, and even children. Large-scale dairy, beef, pork, and poultry manufacturers are subject to inspections, are expected to keep diligent and honest records, and voluntarily spend millions of dollars annually in the care of their animals. If it's to be expected that producers with thousands of animals be able to provide competent care and protect those creatures as autonomous beings with whose welfare they have been tasked, the same should be expected of small, independent operations. Advancements in animal medicine, psychology, and technology are nothing new. For centuries, people have been innovating more efficient, less stressful ways to tend to animals of all types, from companion animals to wildlife. However, because the number of animals and the economic impact of the industry, livestock production may have seen the most innovation throughout the 20th century. Unfortunately, even with free and easy access to information and the availability of inexpensive and easy-to-use tools, many small producers are using livestock management techniques that predate the Industrial Revolution. This is especially prevalent in independently owned and operated beef ranches throughout the United States, those with only a couple dozen or up to 100 head of cattle. Whether this is through willful ignorance, lack of accountability, or a blatant disregard for animal welfare, it is an issue that should be addressed. Small-scale beef ranchers may have found their way into the industry through inheritance, homesteading, hobby, or may have existed in this capacity for their entire lives. For the sake of simplifying discussion, The term heirloom rancher will be applied to all of these individuals, unless needed to distinguish between individual methods or mentalities that may lead to concerns for the cattle under their care. The vast differences in the lives of these bovine when compared to the counterparts at large-scale or commercial facilities starts off even before they are born. A tremendous amount of care and attention go into breeding and prenatal care at professional facilities. Exposure to bulls, if used at all, are monitored and recorded, paying attention to the estrus cycles of the cow, the safety of the herd around the bull, and the genetics of the animals, not only to prevent inbreeding, but to cull possible genetic diseases. Conversely, on an heirloom ranch, a bull may be borrowed from a neighbor, hop a fence, or be left on pasture for years. This can lead to a multitude of problems, from the passing on of unknown genetic or pathogenic diseases to the misclassification of the breed of animals. Sadly, but not uncommon, bulls will be left on pasture to breed with their own heifer calves, which can not only lead to health problems with the subsequent progeny, but often decreases the quality and quantity of the beef. As the calf develops in utero, additional care should be given to the mother cow, both for her benefit and for that of her unborn calf. While credible livestock nutrition information is readily accessible, even the uninformed should know enough about the human reproduction process. At least, the mother often needs additional food or resources. Consider the ubiquity of the term eating for two. Leading again with the example of commercial operation, cows have their diet adjusted and are given supplements to encourage the growth of the fetus, the production of milk, and the maintenance of the cow's health. Cows on heirloom ranches are often left out to pasture, even until the calf is born, subsisting on the same diet of undergrown grass that they live on throughout the year. In a better case scenario, breeding could be timed so pre-parturition grazing happens on the best spring grass, but without breeding control, calves may be born when there is nothing but dry, brown grass left. Not only do neither of these scenarios provide the cows with the additional nutrition needed to produce healthy calves, it opens both mother and calf up to other possible problems, such as disease, poisoning, and malnutrition. Pasture rotation is an important part of any ranching operation, but especially critical on those with limited acreage, or, more likely, those who have been overpopulated due to lack of breeding control and culling. Rotation of pastures involves fencing of a property into several smaller pastures and moving the herd from one area to another every several days. This provides the time needed for the grass in its root system to regenerate. Grass that is constantly grazed and trampled provides lower quality nutrition, grows slower, and eventually leads to damage to the surrounding ecosystem through erosion, runoff, and dust storms. Because many heirloom ranches are not supervised on a regular basis, pasture rotation often doesn't happen, as that would require man-hours to move the herd. Though it should be noted that a full cattle drive is not needed to move cattle to the next pasture, especially when the grass is greener on the other side. Pasture rotation also requires at least a cursory knowledge of horticulture, which many ranchers seem unwilling or unable to learn, despite the information being easily accessible. Other excuses for failing to maximize the quality of pasture grass may involve the extra labor and expense of installing fencing and gates. In this case, these ranchers should consider decreasing their herd size to an equilibrium level. Understanding the basics of horticulture or hiring a specialist should be paramount to an individual wishing to get into the hobbyist ranching business. Extending well beyond pasture rotation, this includes basic knowledge of the nutrients and minerals in the native grasses, as this makes up the entirety of the animal's diet throughout their lives. For example, in 2016 and 2017, after heavy rains, several adjoining ranches in Fresno County, California saw an outbreak of congenital chondrodystrophy, with some ranches seeing more than 80% of their calves born with this deformation. After 2 years of mystification at this anomaly and blaming the genetics of a recently acquired bull who had been passed from ranch to ranch, soil testing revealed the dire lack of manganese in the grasses. The addition of mineral blocks which were not previously provided ended this perceived epidemic almost immediately. This is just one example of how ignorance on this subject can be harmful to the welfare of the animals on these types of ranches. Not only is it important for ranchers as the caretakers of these animals to understand what they should be eating, but what they shouldn't be eating. Plants native to the United States and several in California are toxic to cattle. These include the prolific oleander, oak, and milkweed species. Without proper maintenance of the landscape, These plants can grow in abundance, and without enough quality grass or other dietary supplements provided, the cows may be inclined to eat these plants. These can cause a multitude of health problems for mother and calf, from depression to weight loss and even sudden death. Still, the short and tragic life of this hypothetical calf has yet to begin. It's no secret that the act of giving birth is difficult for both mother and child. Beyond that, just like human babies, calves need to be cleaned and fed after being born. While animals generally have an innate instinct as mothers that far exceed that of people, they are by no means infallible and are still subject to the anomalies of nature. However, when confining animals and assuming responsibility for their welfare, the rancher should be expected to provide some level of support to the animals. That is, if there's anyone at the heirloom ranch when calving begins. Those with uncontrolled breeding are likely to have calves born at random intervals over a period of several months, meaning even ranches with some kind of full or part-time staff will be unable to predict when a cow will give birth except through visual signs, which may be misinterpreted by those who are uninformed or working with flawed information. While a commercial producer may have veterinarians on site or at the very least trained staff and a veterinarian on call, an independent rancher may wait until there's a problem before attempting to do anything, and even then, may get their information from a Google search, not knowing exactly what to search for, or from a neighbor. In our example, this is the first instance of two of the core issues of this type of ranching operations: an uninformed rancher attempting to act as their own veterinarian, and the passing of an outdated or incorrect information between heirloom ranchers. Today, even a child could easily debunk ideas like chewing gum stays in your stomach for 7 years, or if you cross your eyes they'll stay like that, as wives' tales. Yet these same types of myths persist, having been passed on for generations of ranchers, as if they were bequeathed in the will along with the ranch land. This misinformation can be detrimental to the physical health and mental well-being of the entire herd. Common difficulties during birth in bovine include transverse presentation, on-call birth, or adherent placenta. Advice on how to deal with these problems may be given by a veterinarian over the phone or even online, yet the heirloom rancher may follow the protocols set forward by previous generations, which lack basic insight to proper hygiene, use of tools, and gentle, compassionate care. Against advice readily provided to the public by veterinarians and livestock specialists, some heirloom ranchers continue to perpetuate such acts as using brute force to remove a calf or placenta from the cow, despite the long-term damage that can be caused by these acts, which can prove fatal. Presuming that our newborn calf, Morgan Friesian, is born without any complications, he and mother cow have a few critical postnatal hours where even minor issues can prove fatal. Unlike human babies who are unable to care for themselves in any way for months, bovid are precocial and should be able to stand and nurse on their own with little help from mom within the first few hours after birth. If newborn Morgan struggles to get up on his own or find a teat, an attentive cow might nudge him in the right direction. Even if the mother lacks some of this instinct herself, another cow in the herd might step in to help. But if they don't, it should be the responsibility of the rancher to step in when needed. Not only for the sake of their cash cows, the herd, but as an ethical and compassionate human being. The problem the heirloom rancher faces is not only in identifying any postpartum symptoms and knowing how to treat them properly, but in being present in the first place. Without controlled breeding, as noted, the calving of a herd can be spread out over a period of weeks and months, making it not only unpredictable to schedule calving into the life of the hobbyist rancher, but exhausting. Besides medical issues, a herd needs to be checked often during calving season for injuries, calves born in inaccessible areas, such as a creek or rocky crag, calves lost or abandoned by mom, calves who have wandered under fences, and exposure to predators. A mother cow may search for days for a lost calf or stand helplessly by while her newborn dies from exposure to the elements or starvation. All variations of cow-calf separations have been shown to cause emotional stress and could lead to enduring trauma to both cow and calf. Likewise, if the cow were to be lost, injured, or deceased, the calf may not know how to find the herd. If he does, another cow may not take him in or may not be able to. These situations can be solved easily by a human with superior resources and reasoning, but that human needs to not only be present, but aware. To say these were worst-case scenarios would minimize not only the frequency with which these events occur, but their detriment to the animals involved. However, if young Morgan manages to breathe, stand, and eat on his own,
stay in close contact with mother, and not suffer from other physical trauma, there is still the concern of his nutrition and health to be addressed. Cows grazing on unhealthy grasses or toxic plants will pass those toxins onto their calves, or fail to pass on critical nutrition as the case may be. Not only that, but young calves may be exposed to bacteria, find themselves in mud or other substrates that can be bad for their health, or get regular infections such as conjunctivitis from being just tall enough to be defecated on by adult cows. This, of course, can be a concern at commercial feedlot as well, but regular care and cleaning can minimize the risk. Additionally, early processing of young calves can minimize many of these risks. The negative impact of uncontrolled, unsupervised breeding extends beyond pregnancy in the first few hours or days of life. One should logically construe that rounding up a herd from a ranch of several hundred acres every week would be an inefficient use of resources and stressful for the animals when compared to doing so once or twice per year. Even the most unseasoned of ranchers knows this. However, when calves are born over a period of several weeks or months, but all are processed at the same time, there can be a slew of negative effects for the calves and, by proxy, the herd. Techniques for rounding up a herd of cattle vary as widely as there are ranchers. Arguments over the efficiency of one roundup technique compared to another are common throughout the entirety of the roundup and processing ordeal. Before even venturing forth on the ranch to collect the herd, there needs to be somewhere to put the cattle. Despite decades of research by experts like Temple Grandin and her contemporaries, and the virtually open source availability of the results of their research, heirloom ranchers may cobble together panels and fencing to create an environment that not only make it more difficult to control the movement of the animals, but increase the anxiety and risk of injury to both bovine and handler. While the old-fashioned square pens have been shown by Dr. Grandin to be a stressful and inefficient method of handling, the blame for the use of poorly designed pens cannot be placed squarely on the ignorance of the rancher. Dr. Grandin writes, "There are usually three basic causes of problems in crowd pens and chutes: distractions, poor handling methods, and layout mistakes." In her Guide to Working with Farm Animals, Safe, Humane, and Livestock and Handling Practice for Small Farm, and on her website, where she provides several free tips for livestock handling and designs for pens available for download. These practices, or a variation thereof, are considered industry standard amongst commercial producers. However, books published by other experts and targeted towards hobbyist ranchers, such as Philip Hashadir in his book How to Raise Cattle, Everything You Need to Know, give such suggestions as use angles in corral building and use old railroad ties and metal guard rails to build corrals. Accompanying photographs show pens built using hard angles, contrary to the advice of Dr. Grandin, and using salvaged materials. With time and money being a concern in any operation, these experts no doubt give confidence to the heirloom rancher when they throw together a crude box using repurposed barn materials. Getting the herd in the pen is no easy task for the uninitiated. With regular conditioning and adaptation to the behavior of the herd, one can get them to congregate in the pen themselves. However, a herd spread across wide acreage who rarely have human contact will instinctively avoid being trapped by these foreign predator animals. Horses have been the standard for working livestock for hundreds of years. Many ranches still use horses for this task. Many horsemanship skills have been lost to time, leaving inept cowboys who aggressively kick and pull the reins of their mounts between periods of leaving them tied up while fully tacked for hours. The treatment of ranch horses will not be discussed in detail, but one can presume that the attitudes towards the treatment of and value of animals carry over from one species to another. Those who choose not to use horses for roundup purposes will typically use vehicles, trucks, ATVs, and motorbikes. While easier to manage for the driver or rider, these vehicles, especially when not regularly used around the ranch, can be frightening and stressful for the cattle. A common technique is to blare the horn of the vehicle to scare the herd into moving, or, if in a larger vehicle, to bump them from behind. These can both be dangerous to animal and rancher should the driver misjudge their control or if the animal acts in an unpredictable way. Additionally, spasmodic driving techniques can cause damage to the terrain of the ranch, destroying game trails and causing erosion and runoff, which can decrease the quality of naturally occurring food and water sources. Now that young Morgan, his mother, half-brothers and sisters, and the rest of the group are in this corral, square around, they need to be sorted. That is, separating the animals that will be processed from those who won't.
It would be convenient for everyone involved if all of the calves would go to one side of the pen and everyone else went to the other, but alas, most animals don't operate that way, and calves especially stay close to their mothers for both food and protection. A herd acclimated to human presence and those human beings aware of bovine behavior can be sorted in a pen with relative ease. If this were the case among heirloom ranchers, there would be no cause for concern. In fact, horses have an intrinsic ability to do this task, but are often impeded by unclear signals from riders. What can often end up happening in the situation of the rancher who knows not what to do is a combination of whipping at or scaring the herd from behind while another individual attempts to block or permit entrance through the gate. This is confusing and stressful to the animals, not only creating a negative human experience, but pre-traumatizing the young calves who are about to go through further stress at the hands of the ranchers. There are a lot of things that can go wrong during the sort, including injury to animal and human. Presuming the heirloom rancher has made it this far without any major injuries and hopefully minor stress to the animals, they must now process the calves. This is colloquially referred to as marking and branding. This procedure includes trapping the animal, using a hot iron brand to scar its hide, attaching an ear tag, vaccinations, and if necessary, removal of horns and castration of bull calves. Sadly, while this is likely to be the most stressful event in the animal's life, it's also the period where a plethora of misinformation, archaic techniques, and poor ability give rise to several health and welfare concerns. Young calves typically will not get into a chute willingly, especially when surrounded by loud, aggressive people. Poorly constructed corrals exacerbate a calf's apprehension, more so when bearing witness to what is happening in front of them or leaving room for egress. A frustrated or unsympathetic rancher may whip calves or prod at them with an electric tasing device. When not available, these ranchers may resort to hitting or kicking calves or pulling their tails to force movement. Several books aimed at beginner ranchers suggest a tail-pulling technique. Some, like Veterinary Guide for Animal Owners by C.E. Spalding, DMV, SICK, give little to no detail on its proper application, advising to grab the animal's tail and pull it over its back, emphasizing to really push. In fact, all these techniques, while effective in some circumstances, may be passed on from generation to generation, perpetuating their incorrect use. Again, the problem of uncontrolled breeding continues to have an impact, as larger calves are expectedly more difficult to handle than smaller calves. Handling larger calves is not only problematic when it comes to getting them into a chute, but increases the level of trauma and risk of infection. While being squeezed to immobility in the chute, even being squeezed to the point of discomfort by overzealous chute operators, ranch workers will often use rope on one or both of the calf's hind legs to further restrain the animal and prevent kicking during the branding and castration process. Lack of knowledge of anatomy and rope tying, along with inexperienced and trepidatious handlers, can lead to further injury to the calves. Spalding recommends straddling a calf's neck, as if riding it, and to raise the head by lifting under the chin. The author also suggests restraining an animal for processing by grasping the tail, press one knee into the belly. This is Spalding's suggested method for testicle banding for bull calves up to 600 pounds, but the same technique can be used for a larger bull, but a couple more assistants are always helpful. It should be acknowledged that it's common practice for the staff of these marking and branding events are friends, family, and neighbors of their heirloom rancher. Aside from other local heirloom ranchers who are the stereotypical perpetrators of disseminating outdated information, these folks in general lack knowledge or experience of best handling practices and do this sort of work once or twice per year, quite possibly in exchange for beer. Logic follows that if operating a 1,500-pound vehicle while intoxicated is dangerous, attempting to manage several dozen autonomous creatures of similar size would be perilous. Nevertheless, for the heirloom rancher, processing must be done eventually. Having the calf squeezed to a table and legs restrained, a team of inexperienced ranch hands may set to their assigned task. Ear tagging is subjectively the easiest task to complete and might even be assigned to children. While learning where to place the tag to avoid damage to the circulatory system is relatively simple, unclear instructions, an unsteady hand, or a thrashing calf can cause the handler to misplace the tag, causing harm to the young animal. Additionally, cleaning of the calf's ear and ear tag layers may be conducted improperly, if at all, increasing the potential for the spread of infection. Likewise, the reuse of a single needle for vaccination increases the chances for spread of infection. As with ear tagging, use of antiseptic agents may be used little or not at all, as has been seen throughout the life and pre-life of these calves. Their wide gap in age and size compounds problems that are already present in herds with malmanaged breeding routines. Not only does the active injection give it some cause for concern, but the timing with which the medications are given can have an impact on the well-being of the herd. An older calf has more time to possibly contract the disease before being inoculated and, if transmittable, passing it on to other herd members. When vaccinated, younger calves have the opportunity to build antibodies from an earlier date, giving support to their already fragile immune systems. Furthermore, some vaccinations may require different dosages for various ages and weights. An inexperienced individual may give the same dosage to each animal because it's what they know or because that is the setting on their injector gun. Livestock branding in and of itself is a topic of much debate, whether or not necessary, and if so, if other means of identification are better for the animal, are certainly arguments with which there are merits and faults. Determining which procedure is best may be too difficult to decipher for the heirloom rancher, and for good cause. However, whichever method they may choose, the cause for concern amongst inexperienced ranchers is with their apprehension in applying the technique and lack of knowledge in proper aftercare. Hot iron brands, which are still commonplace, can cause additional trauma to the animal when under or over applied. An uncertain hand can cause the brand to be blurry, leading to multiple painful applications. Meanwhile, the calf must remain restrained while waiting for the iron to get back to the appropriate temperature. An underheated brand, if applied, will cause the animal pain while not burning the hide deep enough to create the brand. Conversely, a heavy-handed branding can burn deeper than necessary to create a permanent mark. This can lead to long-lasting pain, muscle damage, and risk for future infection. Without access to veterinary staff or even well-trained handlers, these animals may receive little or no attention after these procedures, both for routine infection and more serious issues. Among causes for concern in post-processing care, castration can present a myriad of issues, most of which could be circumvented through proper care and technique. As with branding livestock, removing a young male's testicles can be done through various methods, none without their own virtue and inferiority. In the heirloom ranching trade, the most common procedure, when compared to banding and chemical castration, is the surgical method. This involves opening the calf's scrotum, severing the connection between testicles and body, then discarding the testes. Although emasculators are readily available to make this procedure, in part, safer and easier for both calf and handler, this is usually done with a blade, commonly a scalpel, razor blade, or pocket knife. Official surveys have not been conducted, but one can presume that the average American household, it would not be acceptable to hold someone down and let a half-drunk uncle go to town on their genitals with his Leatherman knife. Somehow, though, this seems to be an acceptable way to treat an animal amongst the heirloom rancher community. As with all steps of processing, improper sanitation is a concern, as well as reuse of tools. In addition to the potential for spreading disease, a dull blade can lead to imprecise cuts, increased pain, and greater likelihood of self-injury to the handler. It's worth noting that cowboy and rodeo versions of these processing procedures exist and are still in use, albeit at a much lower rate than in years past. With the exception of facilitating access to individual calves shortly after birth, it can be presumed that mobile operations would have less access to tools, restraints, and sanitation. With the exception of facilitating access to individual calves shortly after birth, it could be presumed that mobile operations would have less access to tools, restraints, and sanitation than stationary operations. However, any amount of sanitation carried on horseback is better than none in a barn. Following the completion of these procedures on all the first-year calves, the herd will typically be released back into pasture that may be muddy or contain other contaminants that can spread to newly created wounds. The heirloom rancher may not have clean and available indoor facilities, nor the time or manpower to supervise the herd for extended periods of time. Still, the calves, and herd as a whole, should be checked regularly for any signs of infection or distress. Without regular ranch staff, nor the knowledge on what to look for, potentially minor issues can become life-threatening issues. This lack of supervision and expertise will sustain its impact on the herd for the remainder of the year. As the calves grow into steers and heifers, in addition, the lack of professional medical and preventative health care Cattle may be subjected to limitless YouTube, do-it-yourself, holistic, and wives' tale cures for any malady from pink eye to control of flies and other pests. For example, Mike Gilbert, a self-proclaimed iridologist and medical herbalist, writes in his book, treats cerebral edema with belladonna, encephalitis with garlic, echinacea and myrrh. Hepatitis, milk thistle, is best given alone at the beginning of the crisis until the worst is over. He also suggests that puncture wounds, such as from rusty nails, barbed wire, or from tools, can be dealt with very effectively, proclaiming Hypericum and Ledum will prevent tetanus. The same lack of botanical and nutritional knowledge that could have had a negative impact on baby while in the womb and nursing exists as it grazes on its own. Toxic plants, if not remediated, can be consumed and create health problems that, in turn, could have an impact on the quality of the meat produced for human consumption. Sadly, misinformation like Ann Larkin Hansen's Hobby Farm beef cattle suggests that cattle can be grazed on low, wet land not suitable for other animals. She also states, poisonous plants lurk in most pastures, but fortunately cattle usually know better than to eat any. As the calves grow, they'll be consuming more grass, which means the total number of animals grazing the same acreage has increased. Improper or non-existent pasture rotation and management techniques are thereby compounded, leading to even more damage to the biological ecosystem and nutritional value of the ranch land. As seasons change and weather dries, the longevity and quality of the grass decreases, further compounding the correlation between poor land management and animal nutrition concerns. Regarding weather, although animals are fortunate enough to have a protective coat, they are still subject to the elements. Inadequate access to shelter in extreme heat or cold, or rain or snow, can lead to continued stress and eventual physical health concerns. While some may view a commercial feedlot as crowded, it's important to remember the protection from the elements they are provided, sometimes including climate control. Additionally, unsupervised ranch animals may have a hard time accessing food or water in extreme conditions due to snowpack, freezing, or evaporation. Peripheral care should be provided to herd members throughout their lives, however long or short that may be. With an animal that may live only a year, it may seem impractical to spend time and money on something like hoof care. However, an attitude of general neglect until it becomes a problem can carry over to an entire operation. Heifers who are due to be retained and existing cows and bulls should receive regular care to avoid conditions like foot rot and hoof overgrowth, though this work and other maintenance should be carried out by someone trained in the practice and proper safety procedures. Possibly worse than neglecting something seemingly innocuous like hoof trimming are DIY farriers who attempt to learn from a few online lessons. Improper foot care can lead to conditions like hemorrhage and toe necrosis, not to mention the potential for injury to animal and handler during the process. As the animal becomes closer to an ideal weight or age, and as the resources around the ranch become further depleted, the cattle need to be prepared for market. In this case, because beef cattle are sold by weight, preparation mostly includes gorging animals in order to increase their overall weight. With the potential of being underfed and malnourished until this point, a sudden diet change to a bevy of alfalfa, grains, and supplements can cause a number of problems. One of the most common occurrences with this sudden overfeeding is ruminal tympany, or bloat, as it's commonly referred. This is caused by an increase in gases built up in the rumen that can lead to death if not treated with haste. A solution that's considered less painful with lower likelihood of infections and secondary problems is intubation of the stomach to release the gases. Unfortunately, many sources suggest using a trocar or other sharp object to stab through the hide, as seen in both Veterinary Guide for Animal Owners by C.E. Spalding and Raising Beef Cattle by Heather Smith Thomas. The difficulty is not that this procedure should not ever be performed, but that it's presented as the cure for a preventable man-made problem and done so without specific instructions, precautions, or consequences. Despite this and other obvious humane concerns when it comes to these feeding practices, there's an impact on the beef industry as well. When animals are subjected to these conditions, the quality of their meat cannot be expected to be as high as those from a well-maintained ranch or facility. Additionally, marketing animals as grass-fed implies that they graze on grass or eat grass hay. Gorging on additional feeds is not only dishonest, but lowers the consumer expectations of the quality and conditions of beef sold as grass-fed. In How to Raise Cattle, Philip Hashadier recommends direct selling to consumers through value-added selling, which he describes as using buzzwords like natural, organic, green, and grass-fed. Although the beef may be graded lower than that with better breeding and care routines, the impact on the consumer perception of the industry can be affected by the unmonitored breeding and diets of heirloom ranchers. For example, if a rancher with a Wagyu bull and a variety of heifers and cows, for example, Angus and Limousin, may market their products as Wagyu, this may be a half-truth if the neighbor's Angus bull didn't jump the fence and breed the females. A consumer who purchases this lower quality beef with Wagyu, creating negative association in the market. While much of this heirloom ranch beef won't see the shelf at the local big box retailer, it can be found in restaurants and health food stores, often promoted as locally sourced and sold at a significant markup. This beef can skirt the laws and the eyes of diligent inspectors. While some may consider this a freedom of free trade, their actions can not only create a negative impact on the industry and the breed perception, but a genuine concern for the health of the consumer. Without adequate pre- and post-slaughter checks, in addition to the aforementioned lifespan care, the beef that's provided to individuals may not only be lower quality, but potentially harmful. Diseases, medications, and parasites can be passed on to a person through consumption of contaminated meat. This risk exists throughout the meat industry, but proper care for the animal and static health requirements for slaughter help to mitigate these risks. It makes little sense to police every heirloom and hobbyist rancher. However, with some modifications to the requirements for these individuals to offer animals for sale and claiming any tax benefits thereby, some of these practices and practitioners can be filtered from the system. This includes special regulation, record keeping and inspection routine, in addition to greater requirements and access to training and education. Ignorance, intentional or unintentional, has no place in the care of living things. A minimum standard of training for heirloom ranchers or designated personnel should be required for certification of the minimal operational standards. These training sessions should set breeding, health, and processing standards with additional attention paid to land, resource, and ecosystem management. Processing events as well as birth records would need to be endorsed by these certified individuals who could still offer their services to friends and neighbors. Corruption of this designation would risk penalties from revocation of licensing to surrender of animals. With the ready availability of technology and its exponential growth, there should be no reasons that this certifying body could not conduct remote oversight of animals. Some simple solutions could be pre-registering processing events, requiring that processing or calving information be submitted digitally within a limited window, for example 48 hours. This could prevent doctoring of records at a future date. Random inspections could be carried out physically, in the case of processing supervision or soil sampling, or digitally by requiring real-time photos of animals to be submitted through an app, such as those that are commercially available for ranchers to monitor their own livestock. Requiring submissions of unknown animals and unknown parts of their bodies can not only create accountability, but narrow down the need for in-person inspections, simultaneously monitoring the accountability and follow-through of certified handlers. As long as land and resources are available, people will find a way to exploit them for profit. As long as old-timers pass on misinformation as expertise, the uninitiated will listen. And as long as nobody is looking, some people will continue to use animals for personal gain, despite the well-being of those animals being at stake. These are as natural to human nature as language or reproduction. Maybe it's not possible to change human nature. However, by taking little steps in the right direction, such as educating and supervising heirloom ranchers, we may be able to change the parts of human nature that are creating the most unnecessary and egregious levels of harm to these innocent, short-lived creatures. welcome to the anti-penultimate chapter of this epic attempt at sciencing. We're going to look at making media about the environment. And by that, I mean pushing an agenda. And by that, I mean pushing my agenda. I'll share some examples of writing and communicating about the environment through passages from some of my books. Let's start with my first novel, Rockstar Nobody, where we follow a band of musicians as they tour the country, hunting bad people, a la Dexter, except they have no idea what the hell they're doing. I should just read these all without context, huh? All right. I can't stop thinking about D.O.G. as I read Josephine's letter. He had the tight, greasy curls that would create envy in any 70s disco. He was a good dude, but all dogs are, right? Where's this coming from? He died like 30 years ago. The poor shivering mutt lying outside the front door in the snow while the humans were inside, huddled around the wood stove. I'd accidentally let him in when going out to get more firewood from the pile next to the propane tank. Between that and the table scraps, it's amazing he lived the senility. The words on my screen are becoming a blur. I can barely keep my left eye open, it's so bright. That dog would do anything just to have the attention of his people. Child offers bone to dog. Dog accidentally bites child while trying to get the bone. Dog gets severe beating. Child blames himself for the beating. Child neglects schoolwork. Parent beats child. Child blames himself. Logic. Out of all the holidays, Thanksgiving or Easter have to be the worst. My personal hell would be endless cycles of everyone go around the table and say 3 things you're thankful for. I don't think I'll go to Thanksgiving ever again. Not worth it for something else to die. Besides the turkey and ham. There's no preventing that, apparently. The neighbor's dog was the last straw. Instead of 3 grown-ass men using their combined strength and presumed intelligence to break up a dogfight, they stab one to death. The one they don't know. Logic. This is a mining town from before cemeteries were dug by backhoes and excavators, when the ground is so hard you can only dig down a foot or 2 with a shovel, if that. The best bet is to pile a lot of heavy rocks on top of the grave. It keeps the coyotes and other critters from digging up Grandma and taking her back to the pups. This is only if you don't want the critters to get her. Personally, I hope to be eaten by wildlife. Of course, that's illegal in California. What isn't? The whole state could be clouded over with wildfire, smoke, freeway smog, and industrial ag pollution, and they'd still be trying to tell me the vape's bad for me. Avocados are too damn expensive. Even in Fresno, where we're surrounded by avocado trees, they'll charge $2 for a pathetic little fruit that wouldn't even fill out an A-cup. The stupidest thing I see in chain grocery stores is produce that's all from Central and South America. Like, aren't we supposed to be living in the agriculture capital of the U.S.? Apparently, they're shipping all the local produce somewhere else and shipping other products in to fill the local demand. Countless acres of avocado, pistachio, or almond trees, and we're paying top dollar for prepackaged stuff from halfway across the world. That's craziness. I might have splurged on booze and junk food, but I'm not wasting that kind of money on a couple bites of fruit. Okay, that's what I have marked for this one. So next we have The Carlin Trend, which is the sequel to Rockstar Nobody, in which the band does basically exactly the same thing, but now they're in the Pacific Northwest. This is my second visit to the Portland Zoo. It's one of my favorites. For a few years, I made the local zoos part of my routine when on the road. They come in all shapes and sizes, concrete jungle to actual jungle. With few exceptions, I love all zoos. I know a lot of hardcore animal rights people would disagree with me, but so long as the animals are cared for, the most important thing we can do to create compassion for animals is to educate future generations. Not to mention what they do for reproduction of threatened species. Portland, though, is unique in the experience it gives you traveling from biome to biome. Surrounded by burrowing arthropods and nocturnal mammals, Zaya pulls my elbow, drawing me in for a kiss before we exit the corridor into the daylight. It feels early, but it will be dark soon, and cold. Passing the tigers into the African savanna, she tells me, "Did you know a rhino's horn is made of hair?" I did know this, actually. Keratin. Following the curve of the path, we share other random trivia. I tell her a koala has near identical fingerprints to humans, but a smooth brain. She says a hyacinth macaw has a stronger bite than a shark. I've always wanted a hyacinth, I say. Yeah, they can bite that hard, but I wouldn't need to give them reason to. It's starting to sprinkle. The sky could open up at any moment, so I page a ride and we finish the loop, stopping by the gift shop before we exit. Looking over his shoulder, Yevhen swerves towards the curb and slams on the brakes, fitting neatly between the parallel parked cars in front of and behind us. This is it, bro, he says, pointing at the narrow storefront painted in faux ivy. I'll wait here, yeah? You guys want to party? Fuck yeah, Chris calls back as he climbs out of the van. When I asked for weird, maybe I should have been more specific. Taxidermied animal heads of every shape and size line the walls. Bleached bones and dehydrated sea creatures fill bins on one side of us. At the far end, the room opens up to a variety of plants, all green, all living. I'm not an advocate for the display of murdered animals. Growing up, my uncle's dad and my aunt's father-in-law, no relation, had animal heads and body parts throughout the house. It used to terrify me as a child, especially the elephant footstool they would tell me to sit on. It has a different energy here. The animals aren't being displayed as trophies. They aren't bragging about their ability to kill things. All right, moving on. So we have Freshman Nobody. And this is, well, it was written as a prequel to Rockstar Nobody, so you could figure out why the main character wants to become a vigilante serial killer. So this main character or narrator is in high school here. Kim can tell I'm bored with sitting in the office all the time, so she asked my dad if I can go to lunch with her and some of the other employees. Surprisingly, he actually lets me go. I've never been allowed to do much on my own or with my friends. I wanted to go to the fair this year, but I wasn't allowed without parental supervision. It's not safe, they told me. We go to Baja Fresh for giant burritos. I get the spicy beef, but Kim and Lindsay get the black bean and vegetable burrito. They're both vegetarians. You mean like those weird hippies? I ask, parroting something I've heard since childhood while I set little plastic cups of salsa on the table in front of us. They laugh and tell me not all vegetarians are hippies, not all hippies are vegetarians. For Kim and Lindsay, it's about loving animals, all animals, not just the ones people think are cute. They tell me about the farms where the meat comes from and how the animals are tortured and abused, kept in tiny cages full of their own shit. They tell me the sick animals are ground up and fed to the healthy animals. I didn't know that I had a choice not to eat meat. I've always been made to eat whatever my mom makes, microwave pizza, frozen lasagna, chicken taquitos. I remember sitting at the table for hours one night, refusing to eat the disgusting mush that was supposed to be taco salad, not allowed to leave the table until I did. Soggy Fritos, black olives, and oily ground beef drowned in ranch dressing. Just thinking about it brings back an awful taste to my mouth. It could be this burrito, too, now that I know where it came from. We stay up all night writing software to convert numerical messages to text and playing guitar. Corey's parents don't mind us smoking weed or making margaritas in their kitchen as long as we make them a pitcher. I almost throw up when I swallow the warm shot of tequila. Mixed with the strawberry stuff in the blender, it's not so bad, but by itself, worse than beer. Hey, I have an idea, Corey says, sometime around 3 a.m. Let's hike Half Dome. What? Seriously? Yeah, right now. Let's pack a lunch and go. We raid the kitchen for trail mix and lunch meat, shoving them into our backpacks along with our jackets. In Oakhurst, we find the one store that's open 24 hours and stock up on cigarettes and canned soda. We're in Yosemite before sunrise, finding parking right in front of the trailhead. A couple hours into our adventure, we decide to stop for a smoke and some Nutri-Grain cereal bars. Breakfast. Corey and I have both lived in the mountains since we were kids. Growing up, we played outside, climbing trees and rocks, exploring the 1,000-acre cattle pasture behind my house. Not together. We haven't known each other that long, but we had similar experiences. Neither of us have ever done a rigorous full-day hike like this, though. I struggle to make it through my cigarette. The elevation makes it hard to breathe between drags. I tell Corey this might have to be our last smoke before we get down the hill. Chugging my Dr. Pepper, we stuff our butts into the empty can, and I stick it into my backpack where the 4 remaining cans have ballooned out to look like torpedoes, little Led Zeppelins. Hopefully they don't explode. We finish the last 2 sodas on the plateau and climb the cables that ascend the final couple hundred feet that remains of our climb. I devour my turkey and mustard sandwich along with the rest of my snacks, before Corey even finishes his sandwich. He wants to try to smoke a cigarette up here. We each have one laborious drag, then put it out. It doesn't even taste good. The hike back down is easy. The sun is setting behind the mountain above us, and we jogged the last mile or so since we didn't bring any flashlights. Making it back to the old Maverick just before dark, Corey cranks the stereo and lights a cigarette as we peel out of the parking lot. The next one is a collaboration I did with some other folks called You Don't Look Artistic. Subheader, words and images to feed your brain hole, I think. It's been a while. I was going to read some like short story sections out of here, but like they're all about living in the mountains with dogs and horses and all that. So it's just a lot. You can go to my website and you can read it for free. So, anyways, what I am going to do though is I'm going to show you some of my collaborators. They were the artists I did the writing for this, and some of the images that they did for the book. Okay, and finally, my favorite, Patrimonious, another vigilante serial killer book. Surprise, surprise. In this one, though, we have a dementia-fueled old man trying to get revenge on the people that have harmed him throughout his life. The old man never bought into the toxic father knows best mentality that was commonplace in his family. Growing up, being told how to think and feel, and being beaten and degraded if he didn't comply, and also when he did. The old man went the opposite direction. He spoke openly and in earnest with children. He treated them with respect and humanity instead of as subservient miniatures to be oppressed and molded into good little capitalist robots. They treated animals with even less respect, his predecessors. Never mind their proclivity for using them to make up 90% of their diets and most of their wardrobe, but killing animals for sport. Not even deer hunting or whatever, but shooting at squirrels or gophers who were only in search of water or their next meal. They didn't have a garden or anything that the critters would damage. Shooting them was a perk of living in the mountains. Treating an animal with humanity was out of the question. Okay, we'll skip on. There's a ton of this kind of stuff in this book, so, again, you can go to my website and read it if you want to read the whole passages. Oh, and I should say that this book doesn't have a consistent narrator, so we're going to read some from a different narrator. I wish we were going to the lake right now. Instead, we're in another town. It's flat and there are lots of stores, so I know we aren't even that close to water I could swim in. Like I said, though, I like the smells and watching people go about their daily business. I don't like the cars so much. They're loud and the drivers are usually dumbasses, which means they're stupid. Sometimes, though, the cars will have kids or dogs in them, which is more fun because they like to wave at me, or the dogs will bark and wag their tails when we go past. Grown-ups are boring. They like to sit in one place all the time and stare at a screen. Then, when they're done with that, they go sit in another place and stare at another screen. I don't get what's so interesting in there. I like the nature shows about birds or meerkats or fish, but adults only watch words and people talking. Boring. They could be reading a book in a park if they wanted to look at words. Then their kids could play outside. Or if they want to watch people talk, they should do it where there's somewhere for us to talk to, too. They just expect us to sit there and be quiet while they talk and other people talk, and they always talk about the same boring things, too. It's always about money or working. My dad's alright, though, because he doesn't like talking about that stuff. When I'm home with him, he lets me do my own thing when he has to use the screen for the words. I can hang out with him if I want, but I can also play with my toys or go outside, as long as I stay in the yard and don't hurt myself. Sometimes he doesn't have to sit at his desk all day, but he paints instead. He calls both things working. I like the second kind of working better because he lets me help and doesn't care if I make a mess. When he has a painting he doesn't like, he'll let me finish it. He says art is creative and destructive, so if I want to tear it up into a million pieces, that's up to me. He'll let me do it with my toys, too. If I want to see what's inside, Dad doesn't get mad. He'll show me how they work. Okay, that wasn't entirely about environment, but it was all written as one paragraph, so, give it its due. Here's another funny one. Reagan came around the corner. He was the biggest of the bunch, a former juicehead bodybuilder who'd gone to flab. He outweighed the old man by more than double. In an instant, the old man had retrieved the serrated steak knife by its thick plastic handle. Reagan raced at the old man, arms spread Godzilla-wide in preparation for a tackle or bear hug. Wait, time out. When I say he raced in, let's recall that these are all old guys. Back in the day, when he ran with these guys, he was the youngest of the bunch by 5 to 10 years. Nate was almost 20 years older than the old man when they met. If the laws of space-time apply, he'd still be about 20 years older. This isn't some Steven Seagal 5-on-1 in a subway fight scene here. The old man could easily speed walk away from the fight if he had the mind to. After all, he was about the only one of them who could stand up mostly straight anymore. Despite his size and build, it's important to picture Reagan less as a peak performance sumo wrestler coming for the grapple, and more like Gwyneth Paltrow in a fat suit running to hug Jack Black. I want you to picture ear hair and nose hair and hairy saggy balls beneath tidy whities and adult diapers, that distinct old man smell exuding from their pores as they sweat from even the most basic of activities, like staggering around the corner or the patio. Sure, maybe 20 or 30 years ago they could have held their own in a brawl at this very tavern, but with the exception of the old man, who might be a bit tipsy due to his decreased tolerance, these decades of abusing their lungs and livers had rendered them slow to react and unable to maintain spatial awareness. When you get old, your body starts to suck. You can keep acting like you're in your 20s for the rest of your life, or you can start taking care of yourself. I'm not going to tell you what to do, though if you're planning on getting into any geriatric brawls in your golden years, you may want to be able to climb a flight of stairs without asphyxiation. It might be worth dialing it down a bit. Maybe give up the cigarettes and stick to weed. Memory loss is a big deal as people get older. Which is worse, short-term memory loss from smoking a bowl or losing entire days from blackout drunkenness? The first rule about Old Guy Fight Club is you don't remember Old Guy Fight Club. Anyway, where were we? Holy crap. Okay. Ready? Alright, buckle in. At the college, the old man waits until the night class is let out. In the mass exodus of second-hand gas guzzlers, he squeezes the tiny car into the lane of traffic waiting to exit the lot. He follows the snaking line of taillights as they creep down a single-lane road and under the railroad crossing. The old man remembers when they built this overpass. That year, 6 college students had been killed in separate incidents because they tried to run across the tracks so they wouldn't be late for class. Instead of being like, "Hey dumbasses, you're adults, you should know how trains work," they spent millions to divert the traffic from 2 main thoroughfares to this one road that ran through the center of the school. To be clear, the billions of tons of fossil fuel emissions created by poor infrastructure choices like this are the result of a couple of idiots who think they're stronger or faster than a train. It's not just this school, the old man ruminates. The whole damn country is built around car culture. In-and-out drive-thrus with their idling engines, private roads mowing down countless miles of wildlife habitats, parking meters that make more per hour than the average household, louder, bigger, faster, able to mow down whole crosswalks as small children in a single bound. The Geo Metro struggles to climb the freeway on-ramp in second gear. The engine hums and higher, then lower registers as the old man jerks the transmission stick up and down to get the car up to speed. The 8-lane elevated roadway is nearly abandoned in the post-dusk hours, another symptom of bad infrastructure. For 90 minutes twice a day, the freeway became a virtual parking lot of commuters. The other 21 hours, it occupies thousands of acres of real estate in the middle of town. Homeless people will take shelter from the rain or summer heat under the freeway until the police or highway patrol arrive to confiscate their meager possessions and chase them into the elements. Cops aren't peace officers, they're law enforcement. It's nothing new. The U.S. has been built on the philosophy of using the cops and military as thought police. Union busters and McCarthy trials and behavioral health. Like you need to behave a certain way in order to exist. People don't live in America, they live under it. The old man drives north, leaving the community college and bars of the Tower neighborhood behind. He feels like this is about the 1,000th time he's crossed from one end of town to the other without bothering with anything in between. At the last exit, before the billboards and fast food marquees abruptly end, The old man eases his stick into neutral and coasts down the off-ramp. He's forced to turn right onto the frontage road. With 2 more right turns, he's oriented west on the unofficial boulevard that passes between 4 shopping super complexes. It's not an official city street, but the driveway between the corporate theme parks, Johns Hopkins University of Retail Therapy. Aside from several hundred bars and liquor stores, this city, the metropolitan center of the region, shuts down at 9 o'clock. Diners who prefer to eat at a more European hour had better do it at home, else they'll be stuck with ordering greasy burgers from a speaker box. The multitude of big box stores and fast casual chains don't waste the opportunity to advertise to the seldom passing overnight motorist. They leave their enormous signs lit day and night. In the summer, they're locking the doors by the time the sky is dark enough to show off the glowing primary colors behind Best Buy and Target and AMC Cinemas logos. The city has a foreboding silence at night. Aside from the occasional train blowing its horn or the irregular whir of freeway traffic, there are no crickets, no birds. When square miles of farmland were demolished to make way for Walmarts and Dollar Generals and Costco's, they didn't bother saving any trees. The delineators in each roadway exhibit transplanted palm trees that were never meant for this climate. Token saplings are planted sparingly in unirrigated parking lots, a legal minimum specified in the same ordinance. The rooftops and gaudy proclamations of corporate existence are lined with spikes to stop birds from shitting on their blaring visual orchestras. It's no wonder the nights are so quiet. Without grass or trees, there's nowhere for any non-humans to live. Without a way to close the blinds or turn out the lights, the scarce animal population has no way to manage their circadian rhythms. All right, that one was quite a bit. Welcome to Fresno. Ooh, okay. Maybe we'll come back to this one because it's funnier and... okay. I'm not going to do 2 in a row. About the same thing. But the next one's about the same thing. Heads up. The old man calls Shinzi to the elevator and she joins him without trepidation. He presses the white button with the calligraphic 7 and it lights up. The lights around them dim to a comforting candlelight hue. The lift is octagonal, mounted in, half out of the luxury resort. The 4 sides that attach to the building are overlaid with floor-to-ceiling mirrors. The reflection shows the old man and his companion posed in front of a backdrop of towering pine and fir trees. The ravine below the hotel is coated in a thick green mat that shrinks as the elevator rises. The camera zooms out from the money shot over bushy 1970s incredible Hulk porn pubic hair. The view from the elevator is designed to block the other side of the village. The parched yellowed fields with for-lease and build-to-suit signs that border the drive-thrus and parking lots and lesser hotels. A luxury hotel that doesn't overlook the town. The old man felt his fingers roll one at a time from the pinky's end to clench into tight fists. He took long breaths through his nose, not breaking eye contact with his dad. "You're nobody, old man," the old man growled at his old man. "You think cars and boats and guns would make you somebody? Name one thing you've ever created in your life." The boy had asked this of his mother before. She said, "I created you." The most bullshit cop-out answer ever. Teenaged old man responded with something along the lines of, "I wish you hadn't." Clever, he'd thought. Clever enough to warrant another beating, apparently. "Your whole me-first attitude has caused the destruction of the world. Deaths of who knows how many animals. People on the streets starving. Dying of exposure. And why? So you can buy another RV? Because you think not wearing a mask is a political statement? In civilized cultures, people take it upon themselves to wear masks to protect those around them, and not just during a pandemic. You tried to train me to worship cops and soldiers and presidents. Fuck, man, you were wrong about everything. You know when I finally learned what happiness was? It was when I abandoned everything I'd been taught by you guys about success and love and priorities. I got my priorities straight, as you like to say. This obsession with getting more stuff and stomping on everyone and everything around you to get it, or to have some sort of perceived power over people, it's gotta go. Burn the whole fucking place to the ground and start over, I say. The old man watched his father stare him down, not saying a word. You want to see antagonistic, Mom? You people get excited to pave over untouched wilderness for a new Panda Express. You post pictures of yourselves on social media waiting to line up to drop off your old clothes at the rescue mission on Christmas Eve, then show up at a city council meeting 2 weeks later with a list of reasons why government-subsidized, unaffordable housing is fine, but not in my neighborhood and not with my taxes. You make business deals at church, then get mad when your colleague screws you over before you could do the same to them first. You lie, cheat, and steal your way to the low middle and laugh about shooting fleeing criminals in the back. You pander for likes on your MLM business page where you share videos of young men breathing their last under a pile of police uniforms and say, that's what they get, and they'd shoulda followed orders. You elect politicians for their tough on crime stance as long as that crime isn't fraud or embezzlement or anything white collar. Blue collar only, preferably black or brown collar. Alright, and that's how far I'm going to go with that one right now. So, Patrimonious right there. You can see some of the other books up behind me there. You don't have to buy them because they're on my website, or unless you like print books like me. Anyways, thanks for joining me as I press my agenda. And now let's continue on to the last little section.
This next piece is called Environmental Racism, my exploration of how pollution, policy, and prejudice all collaborate to form a beautifully awful ecosystem of inequality. It's like evolution in reverse. Instead of survival of the fittest, it's survival of whoever can afford an HVAC system and bottled water. This essay is part of my upcoming book, some shit I wrote my first year at college. Yeah, the title's inaccurate. It also includes essays from my second, third, and fourth years, because apparently, when you repeat an activity long enough, you experience academic speciation. I've simply adapted to writing the way bacteria adapt to antibiotics, through stress and determination. If you're a fan of meticulously cited ontology, there's more on my website. Most of my work circles around mental health, social stigma, and animal welfare, because at this point, I appear incapable of leaving those subjects out of anything. Even in biology, I end up analyzing empathy and dopamine levels. It's become a kind of personal equilibrium. If something breathes, photosynthesizes, or metabolizes, I can and will connect it to philosophy. The book's expected out in summer 2026, provided I finish it before either the climate system or my motivation collapses entirely. It's the ideological inverse of my other books, which you probably haven't read, and that's fine. Those were creative and chaotic. This one's scientific, structured, and powered by caffeine and low-grade existential dread. Think The Origin of Species, but annotated by someone in therapy. So, let's begin. Environmental racism. In this episode, psychology meets ecology, and both realize they've been trapped in a long-term, toxic feedback loop with capitalism. Environmental pollution and environmental inequity have been widely acknowledged to have negative effects on a community's physical and socioeconomic health. But should environmental racism be addressed as a source of mental health challenges in affected communities? Studies show that communities facing higher levels of environmental toxins, often due to long-standing environmental racism, report higher rates of mental illness, suggesting a relationship between environmental and social factors. Additionally, communities of color are faced with other forms of systemic racism that further damage their mental health. These environmental and systemic factors are tightly interwoven, increasing their negative impact. Addressing environmental racism through adequate mental health care in affected areas and equitable urban planning could lead to improved mental health in marginalized communities. Environmental injustice is typically experienced through heightened exposure to pollution and through limited access to adequate environmental services. This can be due to industrialization, waste facilities, or lack of green space in dense urban planning. According to the University of Michigan Center for Sustainable Systems, although people of color make up 42% of the overall population of the United States, there are 52% of the population in counties with unhealthy levels of air pollution and 63% of the residents in counties with the worst air quality. Communities of color are more likely to experience chronic and acute health conditions as a result of hazardous air and water quality. Poor physical health is likely to lead to worsened mental health and lowered overall community morale. However, physiological health factors aside, environment alone can lead to a decrease in quality of mental health. Micro and macro elements of environment and mental health, researchers at the University of Oslo in a study of 31,000 participants reported Our findings support the notion that environmental characteristics are related to population mental health in distinct ways and are also intricately linked with each other. Multiple environmental factors, such as experiencing problems with noise or contamination, crime, violence, or vandalism in the residential area, and worrying about violence or threats when walking outside and alone, had notable connectedness in the networks. While all of these metrics don't directly have to do with the natural environment, it's important to note that they highlight the interconnectedness of these factors. Though, the results of Bjorndal's background studies note the direct link between pollution, green space, and mental health. Noise annoyance and traffic noise have been linked to anxiety and depressive systems in both prospective and cross-sectional studies. Air pollution was associated with increased risk of common mental disorders in a recent longitudinal study. Conversely, more neighborhood green space has been related to lower depressive systems. So both concepts of environment can be shown to be independent and interconnected factors in reduced mental health. Less green space means less safe walkable space. Less safe walkable space leads to more crime and violence, leading people to stay at home, where they may be exposed to various pollutants. People staying in leads to less utilization of green space, and the cycle continues. All of these can play a role in depressive systems and other health conditions. The brief mention of availability of green space in the aforementioned study should not be overlooked. Yes, communities of color are subjected to greater noise, air, water, and light pollution, which can all have a negative impact on physical and mental health. But these communities have less available green space, parks, and natural areas, which can lead to a further decrease in mental health. Just the act of being outside, away from the concrete jungle, in a more natural environment, has been shown to have positive health effects. In a 40-year longitudinal study, University of Canterbury researchers found that access to green space resulted in an 8 to 12% decrease in depression and anxiety symptoms in adults. With the skyrocketing cost of healthcare, an understaffed system produces inadequate results. If an increase in urban green space would contribute to a decrease in depression and anxiety, or an increase in overall health, it seems like incorporating more green spaces would be financially effective and labor-minded solution. Of course, there's more to it than just building more parks. They have to be utilized and kept free from crime and vandalism, to which some might say to increase the police presence. But that gets deeper into the systemic racism part of the problem. The police harass people for being in the public space. The residents don't feel safe being there. People not using the space leads to a decrease in community involvement, which leads to a decrease in prosperity, which leads to an increase in crime, and so on. Therefore, the mindset around designing green space and equitable environmental justice must take place on a community level, not a bureaucratic level. Many already disadvantaged communities are underrepresented in local government, and simply plopping down a few parks in some unused lots wouldn't sufficiently meet the needs of the community. Danny Hastings writes for Close Up, a Washington, D.C. civic education organization. A park can serve as a great equalizer in a community, a place where all people can interact with each other regardless of age, race, socioeconomic status, or ability. It's a place meant to be utilized and enjoyed by all, not just a few. Green spaces add to the civic health of a community by serving as meeting spots where people can come together in recreation and celebration, where they hold vigils and stage protests, or where they enjoy the company of others and escape the world for a moment. While Deborah Cohen and cohorts elaborated on park usage in a survey of park patrons and personnel for the National Institute of Health. The observation of organized activities, whether or not they are sponsored by the park itself, appeared to be responsible for attracting the most people. That is, there are secondary mental health benefits of green spaces beyond their mere existence, but they have to be actively used. Civic engagement and group activities can lead to a further decrease in depression and anxiety systems, as well as a stronger sense of community. One might think that the lack of these community spaces could be part of the systemic racism in government. What better way to oppress a community but to deny them access to clean, safe places to gather? In fact, systemic racism itself has been shown to have negative mental health effects. In a study that highlights the cascading effects of racism, researchers at the Medical College of Wisconsin show the again interconnected facets of environmental injustice and racial injustice. Results further demonstrate that the cumulative burden of racism across several levels is associated with poorer mental health. The cumulative multi-level impact of racism, demonstrated by analysis of the social and environmental adversity factors, had the strongest relationship with greater PTSS, anxiety, and depression symptoms, reinforcing the impact of multi-level conceptualizations. It appears that communities of color are having their mental health bombarded from all sides. Overt and covert racism, environmental health hazards, lack of green and community spaces, all of which independently contribute to poor mental health. But when their powers combine, they become super depression. And a depressed, anxious community is a complacent, easily oppressed community. But wait, there's more. With all these contributing factors to mental illness, the laws of supply and demand would mean that these communities have easy access to mental health care, right? No. In a study on racial and ethnic disparities in mental health care, Thomas McGuire of Harvard Medical School and Jean Miranda of UCLA find racial and ethnic minorities have less access to mental health services than do whites, are less likely to receive needed care, and are more likely to receive poor quality care when treated. Minorities in the United States are more likely than whites to delay or fail to seek mental health treatments. After entering care, minority patients are less likely than whites to receive the best available treatments for depression and anxiety. The communities most in need of these services, who have the most contributing environmental factors to their need, have the least access to them. But it's not just about access to mental health services, though surely that could provide some temporary relief. With communities structured around industrialization, waste dumps, and other pollutants, and their lack of natural community spaces, the solution would require an entire retooling of the entire residential industrial system. Robert Figueroa writes of University of Illinois professor Peter Wentz's essay, Just Garbage. Wentz proposes to distribute environmental burdens to those who consume the most and who enjoy the most environmental benefits, particularly the most affluent communities in the United States. Wentz argues that this policy would lead to the most politically influential citizens to dramatically reduce consumption and or abate the impact of industrial pollution. Wentz's insight is that it is unjust, even if currently legal, to channel noxious wastes and pollutants to economically disenfranchised populations who do not deserve to suffer burdens imposed by the high consumption levels that others enjoy. Wentz projects that redistributing the waste to those enjoying immeasurable benefits would eliminate approximately 70% of the environmental racism in the United States. This sounds like an idealistic solution in today's political world. Those with the money and influence, those with lobbying power, would be able to easily outfinance campaigns for preferential treatment, while the economically and politically disadvantaged would have little recourse. Carbon credits aren't equitable. Even if laws were passed requiring placement of pollution centers in more affluent areas, those who could afford it would just move. A more reasonable solution that takes all interests into account would be, for example, the placement of facilities in undeveloped areas and the addition of better public transportation infrastructure. Then, as it tends to go, developers build high-density residential in those once rural areas and rent them out to workers who are exposed to pollutants, and we start the whole cycle again. So there isn't one easy solution, especially with the cyclical nature of the problems, but a whole array of ideas that would need to be interconnected in the same way that the negative effects are interconnected. Not only does environmental racism create negative physical health effects, but it can be shown to have positive correlation to mental illness. The physiological harms can certainly lead to a decrease in mental health, but environmental hazards can have a direct effect on mental health. Additionally, the environmental injustice of having less access to green space can lead to a negative impact on both physical and mental health, as well as secondary negative effects like decreased community involvement and civic mindedness. With contemporary focus on mental health, it's imperative that communities of color, those with the highest occurrence of mental illness, be provided equitable access to a clean environment in community spaces that can contribute primary and secondary benefits to their mental health, as well as access to actual treatment for mental illness. All right, thanks for listening.
Welcome to the conclusion of my biology portfolio. 17 modules demonstrating... What? 18? Are you serious? Great. I love that. This portfolio's entered mitosis without my consent. Next up, cytokinesis, if I survive editing. Welcome to Module 18, Environmental Biology Connections, Mixed Media and Communicating About the Environment. Or as I like to call it, all the science you never asked for, plus some things that'll make you question why humans exist. Let's recap, review. I strapped a camera to my dog and realized she experiences the world as sniff everything, pee on some things, and maybe become an obligate detrivore. She's a better philosopher than me. She doesn't overthink. She just does. And here I am, narrating her life. Which is weird. Garden erotica? Yeah, it exists. Lustful flora everywhere. 50 shades of green. Tomatoes and cucumbers engaged in botanical liaison. Bees delivering pollen like tiny oblivious couriers who don't even know what consent means. And me narrating it with the solemnity of a botanical sexologist who has entirely too much time and probably needs to go outside. Not to touch grass, clearly. 2 square feet of lawn. A quadrant? The one where I zoomed in so close I started empathizing with the springtails? It was like discovering an entire tiny civilization and instantly wanting to apologize for mowing the lawn. Wait, did that come before or after the bee and butterfly habitat attempt? The one that got wrecked by a rainy autumn like nature was smacking me with a wet newspaper. Whatever. Point is, I tried. They deserve a home. I'll build them a little pollinator swinger club, too. Ostentatious use of charts and diagrams to show the microorganism populations in my home, which outnumber the plants, the animals, and my social support network. They're thriving, okay? I'm proud of them. My microbial tenants are doing great. Whale evolution breached the surface in there somewhere. Those ancient mammals who saw land, tried it, and said, nah, we're good, before sliding back into the sea like dramatic Victorian fainting ladies. We also used a spirograph to emulate biological patterns, because nothing screams university-level biology portfolio like a toy normally used by children, or adults with unresolved nostalgic issues. We traveled to the local waterfall trail for an analysis of the food web, lichens, leaf litter, tree canopy, the whole ecological charcuterie board. I realized I'm part of the web I'm trying to explain. Humbling or hilarious? You decide. Then came the essay on unethical cattle treatment, a reminder that cruelty doesn't need corporate scale. Sometimes it's just your local folk ranch engaging in microaggressions against macrofauna. I stare at barns, contemplating whether humanity merits another evolutionary victory. Verdict? Cows are fine. Humans? Not so much. An extinct species montage. My sad little love letter to all the creatures humanity punted off the mortal coil. Humans obliterated them, efficiently, horrifically. I got emotional. You probably cried. Readings from my own books, in which I make absolutely zero effort to hide my pro-environment, pro-animal, anti-capitalist agenda. Subtleties for prey species. And of course, the environmental racism essay, because ecological harm isn't distributed evenly. It's distributed along policy lines, income lines, and red lines. Pretending otherwise is the equivalent of sticking a band-aid on a volcano. Ignorance is violence, plants notice, rivers notice, you might too. And somewhere in all this entropy was my introduction, which I now realize was less introduction and more anarchic monologue from an anthropoid who knows too much about ethology. And finally this, Module 18, me trying to stitch this bioscientological fever dream together, but instead letting the ADHD bingo cage decide the next stop. So yeah, using mixed media, I've communicated about the environment, the way a thunderstorm communicates with a tin roof, loudly, sporadically, and with questionable restraint. Over 18 modules, I've built a small biome of videos, each a different habitat patch in the strange, tangled ecosystem of my brain. Join me next time where I'll be reading more of my essays. Topics include animal ethics, mental health, philosophy, and suicide, because my brain likes to do biodiversity even in the emotional trauma department. You may observe, avert your gaze, or create a case study. The choice is yours. What's that? Can I have something to eat now? Do I have to? Okay. That's all, folks.